Chapter 607. Cohen lowered his head and walked in the alley of the underground street. His eyes were absent-minded, and he ignored the beggars and tramps under the eaves on both sides of the street, as well as their secretive gazes. Cohen. The unkempt man on his left covered the bloodstains on his clothes. Further away, a ruffian was peddling the items in his pockets furtively. A beggar under the eaves of the opposite house was fighting with another emaciated man for the ownership of an ownerless ring. But Cohen just walked past them absent-mindedly. He did not see them, nor did he hear them. What does that have to do with me? Cohen. The glory of the stars allowed him to focus on his own world. He had no distractions. The noise in the distance could not attract his attention, and the filth around him could not affect his thoughts. The underground street and even lower city districts seemed to be just a name on a piece of paper to him. He seemed to be walking beyond the horizon, transcending everything and forgetting himself. Just like many of the nobles he knew, they had their sights set on the kingdom, their hearts were on the world, and they were destined to achieve great things. But, Cohen. Finally, Cohen, who was absent-minded, shuddered and staggered back to his senses. What's wrong? Cohen looked around subconsciously. Leorc was still 10 steps away. His attitude towards them was full of disdain and rejection. Glover dutifully guarded the prince by his side, using his body and expression to block all malicious gazes. Cohen lowered his head. The speaker. The second prince looked at him deeply. His gaze was full of inquiry. Pull yourself together. There was an unquestionable tone in Thale's words. You've been a police officer for 6 years. Morris' words shouldn't have affected you so much. What Morris said, Cohen's eyes were slightly dazed. You're not fighting against gangs, criminals, or even evil. You represent the power of this country. You stand in the position of the strong and face the resistance of the weak. Cohen shook his head furiously. No, it has nothing to do with what that scumbag said. It will not affect me, as if, Glover interrupted him coldly. Cohen stared at the zombie in a daze. He looked like he was struggling. Thale sighed. Listen, Cohen, you have to know that Morris is a member of the Brotherhood. Everything he said, no. Unexpectedly, Cohen suddenly spoke loudly, startling both Thales and Glover. Even Leorc frowned and turned his head. Thales frowned as he looked at Cohen. Cohen doesn't usually react like this. If it's not him, no. At this moment, Cohen's expression changed as he muttered anxiously. Hey. Glover patted Cohen carefully. At the same time, he glared at a few idlers who were attracted over from afar. You're fine, Cohen suddenly looked up. When you turned the situation around in Heroic Spirit Palace and forced all parties to stop fighting and retreat, Your Highness. The police officer stared at Thales eagerly, as if he was searching for an answer. The extensions, were they moved by your words? Thales was stunned. Extensions, but Cohen shook his head, his expression bitter. My old man's reply was like this, words are only expressions, actions are only about the heart. As for, sweet words can bewitch the heart, this is just a beautiful fantasy of the writers. Thale's expression changed. He wanted to say something, but stopped himself. He said that it was not your words that moved the extensions, Your Highness. The police officer lowered his head dejectedly. It was their true thoughts, their personal experiences, and their interests. You were just the person who lifted the curtain and revealed their true intentions. Thales was silent for a while. Count Tarami Caribbean is indeed the descendant of the wise minister. The prince sighed. If there is a chance in the future, I will visit your father. Cohen's gaze was conflicted, as if he was going through a cruel struggle. At that time, I was not convinced by the old man's words, but, it's the same, Your Highness. Cohen exhaled. That fat man is good with words, but he could not have swayed me with just a few words. Unless there was something else that swayed me. He stared at the narrow alley quietly, as if he could never see the end. Thales looked at him and sighed in his heart. I refused to admit it, but... Cohen hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he gathered his courage and spoke decisively. Yes, my heart of the sword was swayed. My moves became more and more practiced, and the edge of my sword became sharper. Cohen gritted his teeth and said, but the person wielding the sword was rusty. This is the reason why I stagnated and did not improve in the past 6 years. Thales furrowed his eyebrows tightly. Maybe you should go back to the battlefield and roll in blood again. Glover snorted softly. He did not like Cohen's expression. Instead of going out on the streets to catch thieves every day. Callan. Thales gave Glover a warning glance, and the latter did not say anything else. I am serious. Cohen did not show any signs of anger, but his gaze was dejected. But what swayed me was not that stupid fat man's nonsense. It was me. It was my experiences in the past 6 years in this city. Experiences in this city. Thales paused for a moment because of this sentence. The memories in the abandoned house were like a dream or fog, and they entangled around his feet again. Do you know, Your Highness, the little girl who stole your money just now? Cohen walked behind the prince and said absent-mindedly, she might not like to steal or extort money. When she grows up, she might not like to receive customers like her mother, or fool around like her father. But she had no choice. Thales and Glover froze at the same time. The former thought of the abandoned house, and the latter of Red Street Market. Cohen tripped over an irregular rock, but he didn't seem to notice it. He continued speaking. He continued, under the example of her mother and father, or perhaps just her mother's lover, she could only learn from them and become like most of the people on this street, shrewd, vicious, shameless, and narrow-minded. When she grows up, she will only become another numb prostitute like her mother, or an idle hooligan like her father. There is no other way. Thales and Glover sank into silence. Cohen clenched his teeth and pressed on the hilt of the sword at his waist. Because she was born here. Just like everyone else on this street. Glover raised his head and interrupted Cohen with a cold expression. Then do something. Do something, Cohen muttered. Do something. Glover snorted coldly. Send her scum parents to prison or the gallows. Isn't it your responsibility to fight crime and maintain law and order, Blue? Police officer. But Thales shook his head secretly. Cohen took a deep breath. Yes, but, he paused and relaxed his chest. The words were at the tip of his tongue, but they did not have the strength to rush out. Cohen shook his head dejectedly. What happened? Thales asked in a low voice. Cohen was silent for a long time. It was so long that Glover was about to urge him, but he finally spoke. 6 years ago, Your Highness, when I first came here for a few months, I was full of confidence. I wanted to make some achievements and make some changes. At that time, I treated this place as a battlefield. I thought that my only opponents were the Brotherhood and Blood Bottle Gang. Only their filth and sins, only darkness and evil existed. But, Cohen's words came to a halt. What you fought was not even evil. Cohen clenched his teeth and shook his head. So I worked overtime to fight crime, maintain law and order, put an end to injustice and illegality, and brought security and law back here. But, the word appeared on the tip of his tongue again. In Lower City District, after arresting a batch of criminals, there will be another batch. After clearing out the nests, there will be another batch. Cohen's breathing became more and more erratic, and he spoke faster and faster. After arresting people, they will be released in a few days. After cleaning up the streets, illegal gangs will soon gather again. The sealed warehouses will soon become a cover for crimes. Every year, the number of corpses transported out for burial will be the same, or even more. Cohen's words were filled with bitterness and even a hint of helplessness. Strictly enforce the law and impartially punish people. All these things we learned in politics textbooks are not useful here. I don't know. Maybe I didn't learn politics well. Maybe my methods of stopping crime are too inferior. Maybe I have to be like Cousin Derek and get full marks in politics every time. Then, I will know what to do. Thales listened quietly. His mood was gloomy. But Glover was unmoved. It's useless to only catch small fries. Cohen raised his head and said hurriedly, I did it. He stared at Glover. I did it. I learned from some of my colleagues. I raised my eyes and started to target the big fish, like Morris just now. I took down a leader of the Brotherhood who was in charge of child beggars and cut off all the chains under him. But in less than 2 days, a newbie fought his way up from below and replaced him to fill in the gap. It was faster than the police officer's vacancy. Glover snorted in disdain. That means his level is not high enough. You have to find the source. Maybe you have to use that annoying black sword, the source. Cohen raised his voice again. Glover frowned. At that moment, the police officer stared at Glover in a daze. You're right. Zombies. Their level is not high enough. We have to find the source. The source. Cohen was like an ascetic who was pursuing his faith. He stared into the distance in a daze. As the police officer in charge of Lower City District, the area I can reach is too shallow. It's too close. I can't solve the root of the problem. So, I thought, I have to do more. I have to push harder, go deeper, and penetrate deeper. Cohen took a deep breath. So, I chased after them, to the source of those sins. But his determination suddenly fell. Just like the ascetic who was pursuing his faith, he eventually fell on the road. Then, I met them. Glover and Thales were puzzled. Them? Cohen nodded expressionlessly. The one you met on the street just now, Your Highness, was just a little girl. The police officer's voice was barely discernible. But here, there, and in other places, I've met countless such children. Children. Thales opened his mouth subconsciously. The childhood of criminals. Is there a deeper source than this? Cohen gulped. Yes, zombie. Just like what you said, I took action, acted, and interfered, like the most competent police officer. That includes taking down the gangs behind them, punishing their scumbag parents, cleaning up their living environment, and threatening those scumbags who want to make use of them. I hate to say this, but thanks to my family name, a police officer of lower birth would have disappeared without a trace a long time ago. Those children, I sent them to the orphanage under the jurisdiction of the Office of Discipline, Adopted Families, and even the Sunset Church's Sanctuary of Grace. For this, I did not hesitate to face the hostility of the Brotherhood and Blood Bottle Gang, the internal punishment of the police station, and the disgust of my colleagues in the Office of Discipline. I even put down my pride and promised the old man to participate in the Nobles Matchmaking Bowl. Only then could I get some money from his stingy hands to help some of the children who had no relatives, to satisfy their needs, and to prevent them from falling into depravity again. As they listened to Cohen's narration, Thales and Glover looked at him with increasingly different expressions. The more Cohen spoke, the more excited he became. Then, his emotions suddenly changed. But, the police officer seemed to be frozen in time. He was stunned for a few seconds before he spoke again. A few years ago, I rescued an orphan. At that time, he was a little over 10 years old. I asked the Office of Discipline to send him to the orphanage. Cohen's gaze moved slightly, and the colors in his eyes gradually disappeared. But a few years later, I caught a group of scumbags from the Brotherhood who collected debts. They tortured the debtor's son with red-hot tongs in front of him, just for God knows how many coppers. Glover's expression tensed. Cohen took a deep breath. That child, the child I rescued. He was among those scumbags. He was 14 or 15 years old. Cohen said in a daze, he was too old. He's too old. I can only send him to prison. Just like when I sent him to the orphanage. Thales closed his eyes, then opened them again. Cohen exhaled a pained breath. He wasn't the only one. I only found out a long time later that the children I thought I rescued, most of them will reappear on the streets. The children who originally had parents. After their scumbag parents became obedient for a while, they would basically revert to their old ways and continue to bring them up, just like that little girl just now. As for the others, they could not stand it anymore. They escaped from the orphanage or the families who adopted them. Cohen lowered his head sadly. You idiot. Glover suddenly interrupted. He said a long string of words, which was rare for him. Most of the orphanages are no different from prisons, except that the prison guards are worse. Rather than letting them go there, they might as well go back to the streets to steal bread. Cohen shuddered slightly. As for adoption, it's like a bet before your eyes. Glover's tone was cold. If you're lucky, you might be able to eat some leftovers in the stable as proof that your family can receive orphanage compensation from the Office of Discipline. If you're unlucky, the zombie tightened his collar and did not continue speaking. Cohen frowned. How did you know? Glover interrupted him coldly. I heard it. Cohen frowned. From whom? No one. Glover seemed to be extremely wary of this topic. He raised his index finger and warned sternly, enough. The problem ends here. Thales sighed softly. Although Cohen was extremely puzzled, he did not pay too much attention to it. He only sighed helplessly. Yes, the orphanage and the families who adopted them. I know about their situation. I went to take a look later. These good governance measures from the era of the virtuous king have long since deteriorated. Cohen lowered his head. As for the Sunset Church's House of God's Grace, it's even more disgusting, a deep voice was heard. Cohen and Glover were both shocked. They turned their heads. The quiet killer, Leork, who had appeared beside them at some point of time, snorted softly. His gaze was vicious. I once had a friend who went in. Cohen and Glover looked at each other, but Leork ignored them and said coldly, he continued coldly, there was a very good old priest in the House of God's Grace. He patiently taught him how to read every day, recited the sunset scriptures, and learned etiquette and morality. My friend was young at that time and had never received such care. He was very grateful, until one day. Leork snorted softly. He seemed to be smiling, but he did not seem to be smiling. That kind priest told my friend that as a devout believer of the sunset goddess, the grace of the goddess had once descended upon him. It was hidden in his underwear under his thick robes. The others frowned. The old priest untied his belt and encouraged the child with gentle words. He asked him to break through all obstacles and find the carrier of the grace of the goddess. He then tried his best to grasp it. He cherished it devoutly and pondered it with all his heart. He never left his mouth until he said, "Let the mortal body produce miracles and spray out pure white divine rain." When he said this, Leork burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha, pure white divine rain. Ha 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 ha. On the altar of the House of God's Grace, in front of the goddess' sacred elephant. Ha 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 ha. He laughed in an extremely exaggerated manner. He even bent over, but there was no joy in his eyes. Instead, there was a frightening morbid look. However, the others, including Thales, only felt a deep chill and oppression. Your friend, Glover replied warily and coldly. He relayed it quite clearly. Leorc's smile faded and he glanced at him coldly. Because he was not the only one. The group was silent for a while. Then, Cohen sighed. I did not expect to say this, but, Leorc, I am very sorry. There is no need for that, Leorc rejected him mercilessly. Because the knowledgeable and holy master priest still made a mistake in the oracle. Many years later, on the day he retired, my friend and he discovered it together. When he heard this, Thales, who knew the tranquil assassin's nature, had a change in his gaze. I see. The so-called grace of the goddess, the divine rain. Leorc lowered his head and gently pulled out the blade hidden at his waist. There was a fierce glint in his eyes. It is bright red. Cohen and Glover's expressions changed slightly. They were silent for a while. Then, when Leorc sheathed his blade, he woke up from the silence. Cohen raised his head and looked gloomy. In short, when these children return to the streets, they either return to their old jobs, begging, stealing, swindling, or even following behind the scumbags to make a living. They imitate, assist, or even yearn to become them, because at least the latter can eat well, or, their lives are even worse. Without the organization and protection of the gangs, they are like weeds, and no one cares about them. I still remember that there was a child who spat at me. He said that rather than being rescued by the police station, he would rather return to the Brotherhood. Even if he was beaten up a lot, at least he had an organization and companions. He could survive, and if he was lucky, he could grow up to be as awe-inspiring as them and bully other bastards. Thales subconsciously clenched his molars. Because this is the only way to survive, Leorc, who had unknowingly joined the conversation, said in disdain. It is the only way for them to find their own kind, find happiness, and find a reason to live. And not the so-called relief of you upper-class people. Cohen snorted. He was dispirited. And almost every criminal, gamblers, robbers, swindlers, prostitutes, thieves, gangsters, and thugs, has had a similar bad experience since they were young. Sometimes, they had an irresponsible drunkard father, sometimes, they had an immoral playmate, sometimes, they had to live in poverty, sometimes, they had to deal with the cold and heartless society, and sometimes, they had to deal with this dirty street. Compared to these, even the Blackstreet Brotherhood and Blood Bottle Gang do not seem so ferocious and detestable. The police officer's words made the rest of them sink into deep thought. Pitiful, hateful, pathetic, and hilarious. In the end, I don't even know whether it was natural for them to become what they are today, whether it was their own choice or not, whether it was their own choice or not, whether it was their own choice or not, whether they deserved it or were wronged. Yes. Leorc was the first to speak. He spat on the ground in disdain. As if we care about what you think, cop. But Cohen did not care about his offense at all. We just, over and over again, lock their scum parents in prison or send them to the gallows. Then, we leave them in a bigger, messier, and darker whirlpool. We wait for them to absorb the nutrients, acknowledge the rules, and grow up bit by bit. The police officer's face was gloomy. They will become the new scum. Then, we will capture them when they become scum. Then, we will wait for their newborn children to grow up in the same whirlpool and become the new scum. He raised his head again and looked into the distance of the dilapidated street, but he still could not see the end. That is their own choice. Glover spoke. There was a hint of indignation and anger in his words. They will bear the consequences. Choice. Choice. Leorc laughed in a morbid manner again. His laughter grew louder and louder, making everyone's skin crawl. Ha 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 ha, Cohen did not answer. He only looked at Zombie bitterly, which made the latter even more unhappy. But they have no choice. Thales, who had not spoken for a long time, slowly opened his mouth and attracted the trio's attention. They have no chance. The prince walked up a few steps and headed towards the place he was once most familiar with. In this kind of community, the socio-economic status of their parents is limited. Sorry, I mean, they can't go to school since they were young, can't acquire a skill, and can't see the wider world. Thales walked past a corner that he had passed countless times when he was young. They are bound here and can't find a normal and stable job. They can only wander between idleness and committing crimes. They have no time to care about morality and the law. They can only prioritize things that can support their survival. They can't understand ideals and dreams. They can only reproduce the selfishness, narrow-mindedness, viciousness, laziness, despicableness, and anger forced upon them by life in the mud of reality. They don't have the chance to feel morality, gratitude, selflessness, unity, and justice like us, who claim to be healthy people. They can only learn the true meaning of life from the ruthlessness of the streets and the cruelty and terror of their peers. Thales sighed. Their poverty will only be passed down from generation to generation. The same goes for crime. Cohen's expression became more and more unpleasant. Glover's expression did not change. Only his breathing quickened. Leoric crossed his arms and walked along the wall subconsciously. And when the kind-hearted people outside ask, "Why is it like this?" Thales said sadly, "People will pinch their noses and answer with condescension and disgust, because they are scum, because they have a bad upbringing, because they do not learn well, or even because they were born that way. Selfish, narrow-mindedness, viciousness, laziness, despicableness, anger, ignorance, and even committing crimes. It's all their own choice." The teenager's words suddenly sped up. People will say, "We didn't force them not to be self-reliant, force them not to improve, force them to be immoral, force them to commit crimes and become criminals, right?" The prince's emotions shocked Glover. The zombie asked hesitantly, "Your Highness." Thales said absent-mindedly, "Some of what they say is true, but it's not just that. Not just that. If we really want to change the situation, and not comfort ourselves." Glover and Cohen looked at each other. Leoric still crossed his arms and said nothing. Thales slowly raised his head. "And when their existence and behavior, all nurtured in such a deviant environment, threaten the freedom and safety of people," Meng Chao said. "People will be filled with righteous indignation and will say, criminals must be hanged because they deserve it. People will say, as long as these scum die, they will not be able to harm others, and the future will become better." Cohen bit his lip. If all the scum die," Leoric sneered. "Then, what else can people use to prove that they are good people?" Thales shook his head and ignored Leoric's extreme words. "Just like what you said just now, in the desert, be it orcs or humans, they all believe that as long as they kill all their enemies and leave none alive, peace will come. Then, peace will come." Glover and Cohen were both stunned. But the problem is... At that moment, Thales felt like he had returned to the prison of bones, Crassus of the disaster swords. Ricky's words echoed in his ears. "How are we going to kill those?" Thales said in a daze. "Enemies that cannot be killed." Everyone was silent for a long time. "So, just like what that fatty said, the Brotherhood is everywhere and will never die." Cohen carelessly combed his hair and said in pain, "Even if I kill Black Sword, there will still be countless new Black Swords. They will pick up his weapon, speak his language, and even take on his appearance. This is our real enemy, an enemy that cannot be killed." Leoric chuckled and tightened the black silk on his arm. "Punishment will not work, prohibition will not work, help will not work, and charity will be useless." There was a deep sense of helplessness in Cohen's tone. "That was the first time I understood that my sword can kill." Cohen raised his head in a daze. "But it cannot save lives. Not even one." Chapter 608. Glover snorted angrily. At the very least, you can stop others from killing. The zombie stared ahead. Then, you can save lives. Cohen laughed bitterly and did not answer. No. The person who spoke was Thales. This made Glover's desire to refute fade away. Trust me, zombie. That's not it. Thales shook his head. Stop killing and save lives. They look very similar. Thales said faintly. There are also many people who say that as long as the murderer is killed before he kills, it is equivalent to saving the person he is about to kill, and the problem can be solved. But trust me, Callan. Those are two different things. There is still a long way to go between the two. Glover did not answer. He was still deep in thought. At this moment, Leorc's cold laughter traveled into their ears. You don't have to be so kind, young masters. There is no one in this world who deserves or expects you to save them. The assassin from the Brotherhood raised his hand and pointed at the dilapidated houses around him. Look, this is our life. It has always been like this. There is no need to change it, let alone save it. Upper-class people like you who are so arrogant can't save anyone. Cohen's frown deepened. You know, I have a friend, a very good friend. She also grew up in a similar environment. When I asked her, she also sneered and told me to give up, Cohen said gloomily to Leorc. This is how the world is. It is self-contained and has its own rules. It's good enough that I can take care of myself. Acknowledge the rules, accept the rules, adapt to the rules, use the rules, and control the rules. Only by doing so can we rewrite the rules in the future. Thales clenched his fists. At that moment, he actually thought of the two people saying the same thing despite their differences. Hold on to your sword. Don't lose it. What you need to do is not to make up for it, but to control it. Not to stand on this high wall and sigh, but to lean on this high wall and ride the wind and waves. Cohen sighed. She always said that, then she picked up the knife and killed the scumbags I caught and released. Cohen came to his senses. He knew that he had made a slip of the tongue, so he shook his head. Sorry. Your friend, Leorc said nonchalantly, as if this was his personal rule. She is right. At least. The killer cast a glance at the police officer. It's much more effective than your nagging. Cohen shook his head. But the same, he said bitterly. She can kill. But I can't save anyone. She and I, we often quarrel about this. Thales chuckled. Believe me, Cohen, the quarrel is not your fault. The teenager raised his head and sighed. Even after a few thousand years, there will still be people quarreling over it. Cohen shrugged. Maybe. He sneered in a rather self-deprecating manner. So I don't know. I don't know what to do. I've talked about these troubles to my colleagues, my superiors, and even my superiors' superiors. But every time, they would pat me on the shoulder with tolerance and sympathy. They would tell me that they understood, because they were once like me. They were young, passionate, hardworking, and confused. Cohen's tone turned gloomy. Then, after a long time, when they came back one day, they give up, Glover said hoarsely. They gave up. Cohen nodded subconsciously. They're either used to it and become numb to it, or they're in cahoots with others to take advantage of the situation, or they don't care about it at all, or they're self-righteous and virtuous. Even if there are a few newcomers, they'll slowly be assimilated by the rules and regulations, the tiring work, and the fruitless effort. They'll eventually lose their original selves, Leorc snorted coldly. Unbelievable. These words came from a young master of noble birth who never worries about basic necessities. He glanced at Cohen. I promise you, cop, the quiet killer said casually. If I want to kill you in the future, I will be more precise. Cohen sneered without a care. If I want to kill you, I will leave your corpse intact, Glover coldly countered on behalf of the police officer. For your tour guide this time. Leork looked at him coldly. It doesn't matter what I think, Cohen sighed. Western District, Lower City District, West City Gate. These are supposed to be under my jurisdiction. I should be the guardian here. He raised his head haggardly and looked at the filthy road in front of him. But the truth is, they are like my nemesis. They devour all my fantasies. Glover pursed his lips and said nothing. Leork looked smug. Thales, on the other hand, looked at Cohen sorrowfully. I want to bring about some changes. When he said this, Cohen gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. But, his fists suddenly loosened, and he seemed to have lost his soul. That fatty Morris, and you, your highness, you made me understand that what I am fighting against is not just crime. Cohen said in a daze, I don't know. I don't know if what I'm doing is useful. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm really like what they say, an idiot who does useless work, a stupid police officer. Thales looked at him, unable to bear it, but he did not know how to comfort him. Even changing the position of a flower pot in the police station. Cohen smiled. His smile was a little sad. I can't do anything about it. Glover could not help but say, you are the young master of the Caribbean family. If even you can't, you are right. Cohen looked at him and shook his head with a bitter smile. It is precisely because I am the heir of the Caribbean family. But, Cohen lowered his head slowly. I only have one sword, and I am alone. The police officer looked at his family heirloom sword and sighed. But I have to face the wound that it has cut itself. It is too difficult. Thales sighed as well. Do you remember the girl in the pharmacy? The prince said softly. Yanni. The three of them turned their heads. She only has a pair of hands. Thales lowered his head and looked at the increasingly uneven road under his feet. He was focused on counting the pits. Just like you only have one sword. Who do you think is more difficult? Cohen was stunned. But Thales did not speak again. He just stared at the road under his feet. This material, this feeling of his feet, this direction. They are getting closer. A sense of familiarity and panic attacked him at the same time, making him unwilling to raise his head. But the journey would eventually come to an end. We are here. It felt like only a second had passed before Leork's cold and lonely voice rang in his ears. This is the abandoned house. The child beggars are usually abandoned house. Thales forced himself to stop trembling and raised his head. The familiar facade, the familiar trench, the familiar rows of dilapidated houses. Almost at the same time, Cohen and Leork's expressions changed. Strange. Cohen sized up the rusty iron gate of the abandoned house. What's wrong? Glover did not understand. Cohen stepped through the iron gate and looked at the rows of old and dilapidated houses before him. Many people in ragged and dirty clothes raised their heads and looked at them numbly. The police officer frowned. There are people inside. Glover snorted coldly. Nonsense. No, no, no. You don't understand, Cohen explained. A few years ago, I followed the police station's team to sweep the place. The abandoned house was always empty. The scumbags could always move ahead of time, including the countless street children under their control. They couldn't catch anything. Cohen walked forward, puzzled. It's just that I've never seen anyone living in it. Thales caught up with him and frowned. They walked on the terrible muddy road and passed by rows of stone houses that had not been repaired for a long time. They are all old, weak, sick, and disabled. Glover walked past a house and glanced inside. There are also tramps. There are also child beggars. But Thales still frowned. They turned a corner and walked on the road that the teenager was very familiar with, the 8th house, the 14th house, the 2nd house. Thales tried hard to regulate his breathing. On the road, beside the door, and under the eaves, there were poor people who were scantily clad and emaciated. They were either sitting or lying down. There were also people who stretched out their begging hands to them. That's not right. Leoric kicked away a tramp who extended his hand to touch his boots. He could no longer stand it. The abandoned house is not right. Glover turned his head in disdain. What's wrong with you? Leoric shook his head. I haven't been here for the past few years, but, he looked around vigilantly. The management of the abandoned house should not be so lax, and, according to the usual practice, there should only be child beggars and thugs here. And there should not be so many tramps. Some of them are not from the Brotherhood at all. Glover still could not understand, but Cohen narrowed his eyes. Thales was the only one who did not speak as he looked at the abandoned house that was filled to the brim by the poor people. At this moment, a lazy voice came from a broken recliner beside him. Hey, if you are here to rob, then you have come to the wrong place. The four of them turned their heads. A pitiful man with a sallow and emaciated face straightened his back on the recliner and yawned. The abandoned house belongs to Blackstreet Brotherhood. Leoric's gaze shifted. Mertessa. When he heard this name, the man with the sallow face shuddered. He struggled to get up from the recliner and stared at the quiet killer. In the end, he called out his name in a daze. You are Leoric? Yes. Leoric recovered from his astonishment. Why are you here? The expression of the man named Mertessa changed several times. In the next second, he stood up, turned around, and left. Hey, wait! Leoric chased after him. Thales and the rest were baffled. Who is he? Leoric gritted his teeth and chased after him. He joined the Brotherhood in the same year as me. It's just that I haven't heard his name for a long time. Mertessa, stop. Mertessa's footsteps were limping, and he was not agile. Get lost. Stay away from me. The man did not even turn his head around, but he retorted irritably. Leoric's gaze turned cold, and he suddenly sped up. Asterisk thud. Asterisk a dull thud rose. Mertessa felt his feet stumble. He then lost his balance and fell to the ground in pain. You forced me to do this. Leoric walked to his side coldly and watched Mertessa roll over in a pathetic manner. Now, tell me, why are you here? Leoric's words came to a halt. He saw Mertessa clenching his teeth with all his might as he propped himself up with only his left hand. Mertessa's other sleeve, where his right arm should have been, was empty. Did you see that? Mertessa turned his body sideways to cover his broken arm. He said angrily, Of course I'm here. Where else can I go? Thales and the rest rushed to their side. What happened? Leoric looked at the man's sleeve, then at Mertessa's haggard and sloppy appearance. His expression was complicated. Your arm. Mertessa seemed to be insulted, but he was not afraid of the silent killer. Instead, he roared loudly, What happened? You did it on purpose, didn't you? Glover and Cohen looked at each other. They did not know what happened. What? What on purpose? Leoric asked, puzzled. Mertessa's breathing quickened. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Leoric. 6 years ago. The one-armed man sat on the ground and said in pain, Red Street Market, the one-night battle, remember? The familiar term made Thales and Cohen's thoughts move. Leoric thought for a while. Of course, we won. Yes, of course the Brotherhood won. Mertessa trembled as he tugged at his empty sleeve. But I lost. The one-armed man spat out these words filled with hatred. He took a deep breath and turned his head away from them. Leorc was silent. They said that you went missing. Mertessa snorted coldly. Yes, I did go missing. That damned red bandana, and that damned explosion, I was buried under the rubble for 3 whole days, and it was the patrol team's steel skins who dug me out. When I woke up, I was already in prison. Didn't I go missing? Explosion. Thales looked at Mertessa's severed right arm. He felt complicated. They said that it was a miracle that I survived. But look at this, Mertessa sneered and shook his empty sleeve. What's the difference between a gang's thug becoming like this and being dead? Leorc raised his head and exhaled through his nose. He did not know what was on his mind. Mertessa panted angrily. The others were silent for a while. Mertessa, what happened here? Leorc spoke again. His tone became much calmer. What happened? But Mertessa's words were very rude. Leorc raised his head and saw that the people around him were either leaning against the wall or hiding under the door cracks. They were all looking at them timidly. Abandoned house. Why are there suddenly so many tramps here? Are they members of the Brotherhood? And the child beggars, Mertessa interrupted him impatiently. Don't you know? Aren't you the one who killed Morris? How could you not know? I only care about killing people. Leorc lowered his head. I don't care about child beggars. Mertessa snorted disdainfully and spoke in a strange tone. Of course. After all, you are Morris's favorite. Look at your little round butt, Leorc sighed. In the next second, the quiet killer's expression turned cold. He moved his arm. Asterisk thud. Asterisk as Mertessa screamed in pain, Leorc forcefully pulled his left arm backward and pressed his face against the ground. Listen up, Mertessa. I'm not being polite to you because your butt is round. The quiet killer pulled out the blade at his waist with his other hand and said coldly, I'm also not interested in your severed arm and your bullsh asterisk T. Now, answer my question, or I'll make your arms more symmetrical. Cohen furrowed his eyebrows, but Glover pressed him down tightly and shook his head. Ha ha ha. Mertessa seemed to be a tough nut to crack. Even though the pain was unbearable, he glared at Leorc with hatred and spat out 2 words. F***CKU. Leorc's expression turned cold. He pressed Mertessa's face into the ground. At this moment, Moody. An old and gentle female voice came from the dilapidated house beside them. Mertessa shuddered. Moody. Where are you? Everyone saw a hunchbacked old woman walking out of the door shakily with the help of a tree branch. She tried her best to extend her hand into the air. Her gaze was lost, and her eyes were abnormally pale. Moody, I can't find our cauldron. The one with less rust and only 2 nicks. I'm afraid it was stolen by the people in the 6th house again, the 6th house. Thales was in a daze. Then, the sound of the old woman's branch tapping on the ground brought him back to reality. Mother, go back. Mertessa struggled to get his mouth out of the ground and shouted anxiously, now. Leorc stared blankly at Mertessa under him before he raised his head to look at the old woman. When Thales saw the old woman's expression, his expression changed as well. But we still need to fill our bowls with water for cooking. We don't have a container. The old woman with white eyes extended her hand in puzzlement. She turned her head and listened carefully. Moody. What are you doing? Who's with you? The old woman's words came to a halt. Damn it. She turned her pale eyes in Leorc's direction and put on a cold expression. No matter who you are. At that moment, the old woman appeared calm and collected. We don't have money. Mertessa struggled even more, but he could not resist Leorc since he had lost an arm. Leorc just stared at the old woman in front of him in puzzlement. Look at Moody. Not only did he lose his right arm, even the right side of his body is not very agile. The old woman sighed. How else can we earn money? You won't be able to get anything. Leorc was silent. But the old woman's words seemed to have angered her son. Damn it, mother. Mertessa's face was filled with humiliation. Shut up and go back into the house. But the old woman turned a deaf ear to Mertessa's words. Instead, she calmly spoke in Leorc's direction. If this doesn't make you stop, this old woman has a little friendship with the people in the Brotherhood. Moody is also a member of the Brotherhood. If blood is spilled, it won't look good. A few seconds later, Leorc quietly put away his weapon and let go of Mertessa. He looked at the old woman, and his tone became much better. Mother Bess, your eyes, are they blind? Blind? Ha! The old woman widened her eyes as if she had heard a big joke. My ears are good enough to hear that there are 4 of you, 3 of whom are armed. The old woman's words came to a halt. Wait, you know my name. So, you're one of the brats in the Brotherhood. Leorc sighed. Don't worry, I'm just passing by. Leorc stared at the blind old woman, Bess, and lowered his head in disappointment. I'm just visiting an old friend. But the old woman named Beth ignored him. Instead, she asked her son, what's wrong? Moody. I'm fine, mother. Mertessa, who had escaped, sat on the ground and panted angrily. I said, just King, hurry up and go back. The old woman sneered. Maybe I'm not your real mother, Moody. Maybe I still need you to remind me so that I won't trip over the stairs. In the next second, Bess slammed her branch on the ground. She raised her voice abruptly. But at least I didn't let you freeze to death on the road or suffocate to death in the sewers when you were still a little kid who only knew how to cry. So, King brat, King son of AB TCH. Show some respect. The old woman's swift and fierce roar caused everyone to tremble involuntarily. Mertessa rubbed his forehead in pain. He felt helpless and uncomfortable. Mertessa gave up on talking back to his mother and sighed. All right, I'll talk to the 6th house about that stupid pot. Now, I beg you, go back to the house. Thales and the others looked at each other. That's good. Bess regained the old woman's weakness. She hunched her body and muttered as she turned around, the Brotherhood, ha. How much more do we owe them? That devil's black sword. Mother. Mertessa began to roar angrily again. Bess snorted softly and stretched out her branch to explore the way. Then you guys have a good chat. After all, this may be the last time you see each other. The last time. What's wrong? Leorc glanced at Mertessa's injured body. Is he terminally ill? Bess trembled as she touched the mud wall. No, I'm talking about you guys. Once you join the Brotherhood, you won't live long. Leorc stared at Bess fixedly. Mother. This was the umpteenth time Mertessa had shouted angrily. But at the same time, there was another voice. Granny. Bess's figure froze. The old woman slowly turned around with an amused expression. A young voice. It's crisp, powerful, and changing. 15 years old at most. Thales walked forward and stared at the old woman. You said that your name is Bess. The blind old woman turned her head and sniffed a few times in Thales' direction. The smell of nobility, but it's somewhat familiar. There's also a hint of cosmetics. Why, did you just come back from Red Street Market? But Thales ignored her words. You said that you're a member of the Brotherhood. Thales stared at Bess's face. Why have I never heard of you? Bess opened her mouth and laughed hoarsely. Maybe it's because you haven't grown hair down there. Glover and Cohen had strange expressions on their faces. The old woman's expression immediately became stern. She raised her voice in Thale's direction. And your little chick is still as soft as a caterpillar and can't get hard on its own. Impolite little brat. Mère Tessa said in pain, Mother. Enough. Bess snorted coldly. Her white eyes were lifeless, but they sent chills down people's spines. Little brat, go find Morris in this neighborhood and ask him if he's heard of the black-hearted widow, Bess. And ask the other ungrateful brats in the Brotherhood how many of them have not been spanked by me. Thales was silent. I see. He looked at Bess's face quietly, searching for a memory that flashed through his mind when he was young. He grinned. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind. Mother Bess. Thales repeated Leorc's name. It's best not to, the old woman said coldly, unappreciative. This old woman would rather have some peace and quiet. She slowly but skillfully stepped over the pit on the ground and disappeared behind the wall, leaving behind only her swift and fierce voice. Moody, don't forget that pot. Thales quietly watched the old woman leave, as if he had returned to the past. The moment when he remembered the events of this world for the first time. Look at you, brat. Cry. Damn it, why don't you cry? Don't be an idiot. No, it's better if you're an idiot. I'll be less worried. At that time, her voice was not so old, but it was as rough and ear-piercing as it was now. You have to call me Mother Bess. Mother, do you understand? Even if you become successful in the future, I'll still be the one who raised you. Little brat, may the god of the underworld take care of you as soon as possible so that you don't cause any trouble. At that time, Mother Bess's face was full of disgust, but there was also a hint of reverence. All right, Thales, this is your name. Don't mind it. I know it's not nice, but I didn't give it. It's okay. I'll raise you until you're old enough, and I'll be free. I won't have nightmares all day. At that time, the Brotherhood's nursery nest was dark, narrow, damp, and simple. All right. Hurry up and take him away. I don't want to see him again in this life. Why? You won't believe me even if I tell you, but he's destined to cause a lot of trouble. A monster born to a monster. At that moment, Thales opened his eyes and buried all the clear and blurry fragments deep in his heart. There was still one more chapter. He would finish writing it around 12:30. End of this chapter. Chapter 609. Seeing that his mother had left, Myrtisa heaved a sigh of relief and collapsed to the ground. Leorc looked in the direction where Bess had disappeared. His expression was complicated. You and Granny Beth have been living here for the past few years. Mère Tessa snorted in disdain. Leorc frowned. You know, Boss Morris can help, this is what Mommy wants. Myrtisa interrupted him rudely. She said that the Brotherhood has changed. It's getting bigger and more chaotic. She doesn't want to stay any longer. We might not live well like this. But we can survive. He straightened his body and stared at Leorc with jealousy and hatred. Not like you. Leorc was silent for a while. I remember that you were by Luo Da's side back then. Myrtisa laughed. His laughter was filled with resentment. Of course. Rhoda. Ironheart Luo Da. But hey, look at me. Mère Tessa turned around laboriously and showed his broken arm. He was filled with indignation. He doesn't need trash. And after so many years, how many of us, the so-called 13 generals, do you think, are still alive, other than you, Steel All, and Thunder Axe? How much? Leorc didn't respond to his question. He only gazed deeply at Myrtisa's broken arm. Count your days, silent killer. Mertessa snorted coldly and shook his head. In any case, it won't be long. The two old friends of the Brotherhood looked at each other in silence for a long time. Mertessa, right? Thales stepped forward in a low voice. What happened to the abandoned house in the past few years? Mertessa glanced at Thales. What kind of battle array is this? The man looked at Leorc in disdain. Who are these three? Your new lover. Leorc's expression turned cold. His hand once again touched the hilt of his blade. But Thales coughed. Look, Mertessa, people are watching us. The prince smiled and gestured to the curious faces around him. So, the longer you stay with us, the more those who stole your pot, the sixth house, right? Will be curious about what we talked to you about, or... Thales stopped smiling. How much money did we give you? Mertessa's expression changed. Bah! Mertessa said hatefully, you must be Morris's little bastard. You're as cunning as him. But Thales did not care. He just stared at him quietly. Now, do you want to answer the question? What's wrong with the abandoned house? Mertessa snorted twice. He looked at Leorc and the other two big men before he spoke in an unconvinced manner. If you still remember, Leorc, 6 years ago, on the day of the one-night battle, at this point, Mertessa glanced at her severed arm and spat fiercely. F***ck, no one else said anything. In short, when we were killing people in Red Street Market that day, something happened to abandoned house. Luo Da's son was in charge of looking after this place. In the end, that trash drank too much and killed a bunch of child beggars. The rest ran away. He drank too much and killed a bunch of child beggars. Thales listened to the story quietly with an expressionless face. It was as if it was someone else's story. Leorc narrowed his eyes. Quiet. I remember that trash, and I also remember this. Mertessa nodded gloomily. Someone said that it was a conspiracy of the Blood Bottle Gang. In the end, that trash was killed by a few child beggars. Thales subconsciously raised his hand and pressed on the scar on his chest. But the worst thing was that the guy's father was my former boss. Luo Da destroyed Sunset Pub because of the child beggars. I heard that he even skinned the assistant who was in charge of abandoned house along with his son to go with his drink. Thales furrowed his brows. Mertessa shrugged. I know Luo Da, believe me, this is something he would do. Leorc's expression did not change. I know. Boss Morris talked to Ironheart, and they solved this matter. Mertessa spat in disdain. Solved my foot. He looked at Leorc in displeasure. After this happened, who in the Brotherhood would dare to take care of the mess that is abandoned house? Mertessa turned around and looked at the tramps around him. With this precedent, if something happens to the child beggars again, it will be a slap in Morris' face. He will definitely settle the score with you. Even if you manage the child beggars well, it will be worse. Luo Da is concerned about his son. If he knows that you are in charge of the child beggars, he will definitely find you an eyesore. Who knows, some of the child beggars will become restless. Just like what happened to Quide, they will slit your throat when you are drunk. Mertessa laughed mockingly. He sounded like he had given up on himself. With this, the only people who are willing to come to abandoned house will be the old, weak, sick, and disabled. Mertessa. Leorc hesitated for a moment. You, Mertessa spat in disdain. His tone was filled with pain and disdain. Do you know what is even more interesting? Luo Da has always believed that his son's murderer has not been caught, so he asked me to guard here and wait for the child beggar to walk into the trap. Look, this is a good reason. It is a good excuse to throw away trash. The last sentence was almost shouted out by him. Walk into the trap. Thales subconsciously raised his head and looked at Mertessa again. But Mertessa did not care how his words related to the person in front of him. He only laughed self-deprecatingly. You see, people like us. We are sloppy and do nothing. We open the door at dawn and lock the door at night. Over time, the child beggars gradually become naughty and lazy. Many of them run away. Even the street business is not profitable anymore. Mertessa said gloomily, the new thugs are even more unwilling to come. We have just taken over Red Street Market. Who doesn't want to go there and enjoy life? Cohen, who had been listening attentively, could no longer stand it. He took a step forward. So what about the child beggars in Abandoned House? Have they become fewer? Mertessa looked at Cohen, who was standing in a standard military posture, warily. Which one are you? Cohen panicked. A newbie in the Brotherhood. Thales pushed Cohen back without changing his expression. A retired soldier from the army. And then? Mertessa looked at Cohen suspiciously. The Brotherhood has really improved and become more promising. He snorted softly. In the past, the soldiers who had served in the army were only willing to join Blood Bottle Gang. Mertessa, Leorc reminded him in a low voice. Mertessa waved his hand in annoyance. After that, for some reason, the city hall set their eyes on this place. When he said this, Leorc, Thales, and Cohen were all stunned. City Hall. Yes, I don't know what bad luck they had. Mertessa was listless. Every once in a while, the government would send a mighty team of green skins, blue skins, and even steel skins to attack the abandoned house. The reason was to crack down on human trafficking, crack down on child labor gangs, and so on. The most exaggerated time was when the child beggars in the abandoned house had to be evacuated once a week to avoid inspection. It was chaotic, and even businesses in other places were affected. Cohen's gaze slowly changed. He scratched his head. Oh, I remember. There were a few big sweeps, but Thales pinched him and asked in a low voice, why? I don't know. Mertessa shook his head. I have a friend who is from the Green Skins Nest. He said that they did not want to come here. The leaders of the Green Skins also did not want to do this kind of unprofitable work. But the order was given by someone higher up. They could not do anything about it. Even if they put on an act, they could only obey. Leorc was still puzzled. Cohen was also puzzled. Glover looked on indifferently from the side. Only Thales stood by the side in a daze. His mind was in a mess. The city hall set their eyes on this place, the order was given by someone higher up, Thales subconsciously clenched his fists. If that's the case, he clenched his teeth and resisted the surge of gratitude that rose from his chest. Thank you, Gilbert. So, the abandoned house had been messed around, and the income was not enough to make ends meet. The losses outweighed the gains. Boss Morris decided to tear down the fence around the abandoned house and let the child beggars out. Then, they would be scattered among the various small gangs. A pile here and a circle there. It's better than being caught in one fell swoop. Mertessa's expression darkened. He then sneered. Once the child beggars are gone, we useless people. Aren't we even more useless? Leorc was silent. Cohen did not care about Mertessa's feelings. He anxiously took a step forward. So, the child beggars of the Brotherhood are no longer kept in the abandoned house. Instead, they are placed in the various gangs on the streets. Mertessa raised his head and looked at Cohen. His gaze lingered on the hilt of Cohen's sword. He was slightly puzzled, but he still answered. More than that. Mertessa tightened his empty right sleeve and snorted in disdain. The Brotherhood has long since stopped having child beggars. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. What do you mean? Cohen's reaction was the biggest. He widened his eyes. Gone. Why? Mère Tessa sneered. Because we can't afford to keep them. Leorc retracted his gaze from the poor people around him. Why can't we afford to keep them? Mère Tessa stared at him. Why? You have followed Morris for so long. Don't you know? Didn't he tell you when he ked your ass? Leorc exhaled. He could not take it anymore. He pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword again. But Thales was faster than him. Mère Tessa, do you know what this is? Thales smiled and extended his fist. Mère Tessa spat on the ground. Ha, son of a b*tch, I hope your fist is harder than the thing down there. But Thales did not take offense. He still raised his fist firmly. What I am holding in my hand now is a silver coin. It is engraved with the portrait of a king and a line of words. Mère Tessa furrowed his brows. Thales pointed at the dilapidated house behind him and said gently, 10 seconds later, I will throw it into the yard where you and your mother live, and it will make a crisp metallic sound to let everyone here know. Mère Tessa's expression changed. Believe me, I have seen it before. A small silver coin can change the fate of many people. Thales pointed at the homeless people who were looking at them curiously from afar. His smile did not diminish. Now, let me ask you again. Why can't the gangs afford to support the child beggars? Mère Tessa stared at him resentfully. I have been living in the abandoned house, so I do not know. When he saw Thales put away his fist and threw it, Mère Tessa changed his words indignantly. But I heard from the people on the streets that in recent years, there is a newcomer in the gang. Thales was stunned. A newcomer? Yes, the people call him, Mère Tessa said nonchalantly, stupid police officer. In that second, everyone was stunned. Everyone looked at the same person. Mère Tessa didn't care about their abnormal behavior. He continued to speak. He continued, the people on the street say that the guy is not very smart, but he is very energetic. I heard that he often causes trouble on the streets, especially when he takes care of the child beggars. He is often served in jail. Even when he sees children helping their parents set up a stall, he will rush up and interrogate them for an entire day. Even the child beggars are annoyed by him. Thales' breathing quickened. He slowly turned his head. Cohen stood where he was in a daze, listening to Mère Tessa's words. A few gangs want to get rid of him by hitting him with a stick or something, but that son of a b*tch is 2f* king good at fighting. He has been beaten black and blue a few times. He can't even walk steadily, but he still patrols the streets as if nothing happened. Mère Tessa sneered and shook his head. There are also people who want to take the path of the inner circle of the gang, slandering him and bribing him with dirty money. But no matter what, that son of a b*tch really has a screw loose in his head. He is a complete idiot and is impervious to everything. Over the past few years, he's been complained about, reprimanded, punished, suspended, locked up, and punished countless times, but he's still ignorant and hasn't learned anything. Once he's reinstated, he's still running around on the streets as fast as he can. He just keeps stirring up trouble. I heard that a few gangs lost their minds and decided to kill people, but there was no news. I guess they were stopped. Are you kidding me? You want to kill a gang in Eternal Star City? Do you really think the police station is a pushover? Mère Tessa laughed as he spoke, as if he was talking about a joke after a meal. Glover looked at Cohen in surprise, and Leorc also frowned. But Cohen stared blankly at Mère Tessa. For a moment, he was absent-minded, and his breathing was irregular. Thales had no choice but to bump his arm. A few years have passed. The subordinates of the Brotherhood, the small gangs responsible for looking after the child beggars, are almost in tears. Every one of them is miserable. It's difficult for them to even do business on the streets, let alone earn any income. Cohen swallowed hard. Such a gang will either split up because they can't make a living, or fall into the hands of that stupid cop and end up in jail, or switch to other businesses. Wouldn't it be more profitable to be an escort at the West City Gate and deal with outsiders, or to keep an eye on the brothels at Red Street Market and deal with fat sheep? Isn't that better than raising kids to beg for money, sell their skills, and run errands? Thales did not speak. He just stood there and took a deep breath. So now, it was Cohen who spoke. His lips trembled, and his voice was tense. Now, yes. Myrtessa's tone became gloomy. Now, there are so many streets around here. No one is keeping child beggars in captivity anymore. At least I know of none. It's all thanks to that stupid gang. The child beggars you meet now are either running around on the streets on their own, or working for their parents at home. You have to be on guard against them. What if one day that idiotic police officer comes to shop again? Bro, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Myrtessa looked suspiciously at Cohen, whose chest was heaving up and down. Cohen closed his eyes and waved his hand. He turned his head to the side so that no one could see his face. Only his shoulders trembled slightly. It's nothing. Thales' expression did not change, but he felt complicated. He has a friend who was also tricked by that stupid gang, so he's a little agitated. Cohen hid his face in his sleeves and nodded in resignation. Glover handed him a handkerchief without any expression. Cohen took it and started blowing his nose without another word. Myrtessa put on an expression as if he was looking at an idiot. He frowned and looked at Cohen. Wait. Leoric said unwillingly, the Brotherhood no longer keeps child beggars. If the Brotherhood doesn't raise beggars anymore, what about our street intelligence? What about new blood? Myrtessa chuckled. Who knows? But it's only when we run into trouble that we secretly give the child beggars some money to work for us. Things like running errands, catching sheep, acting as lookouts, sending messages. As Myrtessa spoke, he looked indignant. That's right. Over the years, you've gotten Red Street Market and a large number of territories from the Blood Bottle Gang. You don't even have enough manpower to collect protection fees in these new territories. Who would care about the child beggars? In the past, the Brotherhood was suppressed by the Blood Bottle Gang to the point where they could not raise their heads. But now, look at you, the awe-inspiring Leoric. You beat up the Red Turban until they covered their heads and scurried away. Those who want to join the Brotherhood can't even wait in line. Myrtessa laughed loudly. His laughter was desolate. Who the F***ck has the time to care about useless people like us? Who the F***ck cares? The air was filled with Myrtessa's maniacal laughter. Leoric was silent for a long time. Myrtessa was done laughing. He quietened down. Now, who else has a question? Cohen was still rubbing his face. Glover twitched the corners of his mouth indifferently. Thales shifted his gaze away from Myrtessa's sleeve and did not speak anymore. Leoric stared at him deeply and shook his head. Very well. Myrtessa bowed strenuously and said sarcastically, Now, forgive me for leaving, gentlemen. Once he finished speaking, he turned around and limped towards Beth's direction. Leoric quietly looked at his back and his empty sleeves. Aren't you going to the 6th house? The silent killer suddenly spoke. At least, go and get the pots and bowls back. Myrtessa sneered without turning his head. The people living there are another batch of the Brotherhood's former thugs. Even though they are either disabled or sick, Myrtessa pressed on the spot where his arm was broken, and his voice was dejected. But there are many of them. Leoric trembled slightly. Myrtessa's footsteps rose and fell, and he gradually disappeared into the distance. Myrtessa, wait. Leoric sighed. He walked forward and handed over a bag of money. Listen to me, Boss Morris just happens to need. Mayor Tessa subconsciously took the bag of money. But a few seconds later, his expression changed from astonishment to anger, shame, and then ferociousness. Morris, Morris, Morris. Can you not King keep saying other people's names all day long? You are a human. Mertessa's eyes were bloodshot. He threw the bag of money away and roared, and he is not your father. Mertessa's violent reaction startled everyone. Leoric stared at the bag of money on the ground in a daze and took a deep breath. Listen to me, Boss Morris, he is different from Rhoda, he is not the same as King idiot. Mayor Tessa roared angrily. I don't need your charity. Get lost. One of the former 13 generals angrily dragged his crippled body and left while trembling. This is the so-called coming out to mingle. Glover seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Mertessa's back and said faintly, all dignity is an illusion. Cohen sniffed and still hid half of his face in his sleeve. No, I actually think he is not bad. Boo-hoo, only Leoric did not say a word. He looked at his old acquaintance's back from afar and closed his eyes. Thales walked past him and also looked at Mertessa's limping footsteps. He sighed with emotion. This is his end, even if he was once one of the 13 generals. If one day, you become like him, what will you do? Leoric opened his eyes. His gaze was full of murderous intent. I don't know. But I will definitely not follow you, high-class man. Thales chuckled softly. But he immediately turned around and looked at the big fool who was crying his eyes out. So, Cohen. Thales looked at the abandoned house in a daze. He looked at this place that was once heavily guarded and cruel. The Brotherhood no longer has any child beggars. The police officer shuddered. Thales raised his head. For the first time, he felt that the sky in Eternal Star City was no longer gray. It's all thanks to a certain persistent and stupid, idiot police officer. Cohen let out a heavy whimper. He put down his arms and threw the handkerchief back to Glover, who had a disgusted look on his face. I don't know, Your Highness. Wow, what I mean is. Cohen's eyes were red. He sniffled and said sincerely, wow. Thales smiled. Although it was very complicated and dramatic, but, those child beggars who escaped, the city hall who came to clean up the abandoned house, and the most important thing was you. Your hard work, Cohen breathed desperately and felt the blockage in his chest. He looked at the prince gratefully. They did change something. With endless emotions, Thales walked forward and was filled with emotions. They were useful. Even if there was only one sword. Cohen swallowed hard at his sore throat. His emotions were complicated. I don't know, Your Highness, I don't know. He buried his face in his hands again. Glover sighed and took out another clean handkerchief. Do you still remember, Cohen? Thales knew how the police officer was feeling at that moment, but he was gradually lost in thought. What we did in Heroic Spirit Palace 6 years ago. Cohen looked up in confusion. You said that I saved the world. Thales said faintly, as if he had returned to the winter 6 years ago. I didn't understand at that time, but, just like what you said, our desperate efforts in Heroic Spirit Palace may seem insignificant. Thales took a deep breath, turned back to the way he came, and walked forward. But for those who might be affected by the war in the future, our efforts, indeed saved the world. Thales walked past everyone and curled up the corners of his lips at an angle that no one could see. Thank you, Cohen. Glover followed Thales and bumped into Cohen, who was still in a daze. No, I didn't do anything at all. Cohen came to his senses and quickly caught up to Thales. He threw the second handkerchief to the zombie. I'm stupid, I don't understand a lot of things. No, Cohen. Thales took the lead and walked towards the exit of the abandoned house, which was no longer blocked by iron locks. Only slow idiots. Only slow idiots can become heroes. Cohen paused for a moment. At that moment, shameless boasting. Leoric straightened his back and picked up the money bag that Mertessa threw away. He said coldly, even if the Brotherhood doesn't care, do you think that these child beggars will learn by themselves on the streets? Their situation will only get worse. Leoric squeezed the money bag tightly. A hint of pain appeared on his face. In the end, they will still end up like us. You are still far from success. Cohen frowned. Glover snorted and gestured in Mertessa's direction with his chin. Why don't you worry more about yourself? How can you not become the next him? In that second, the veins on Leoric's arms popped up. You are right. Thales suddenly took over the topic. We are still far from success. The lower city area is still chaotic, the kingdom is still in darkness, society is still unfair, and we are still fighting against those enemies that cannot be killed. Glover looked at the prince. He did not understand why he said that. Thales' expression darkened. In fact, we will never succeed. Even if we do our best and spend our entire lives, even after a few thousand years, our descendants and our descendants' descendants will not succeed. Leoric smiled coldly. But Cohen was the one who replied. But so what? Everyone turned their heads and looked strangely at the police officer who spoke. We will not succeed. That is the meaning of this matter, is it not? Glover froze. Leoric frowned. It is precisely because we cannot do it. Cohen breathed absent-mindedly and clenched his fists. It is more meaningful to persist in doing it. He came to his senses and raised his head in embarrassment. He looked at the others carefully. Am I right? Leoric's frown deepened. But Thales laughed. It was a very carefree laugh. Well said, Cohen. Thales sighed. Do you know who is the greatest knight in the world? Ha! When he heard the cultural studies question, Cohen's expression instantly turned bitter. He scratched his head. When I was young, the old man and my teacher always taught me about the 10 great knights in the history of the empire. But I seem to remember a knight named Needham. Thales shook his head. No. The greatest knight in the world, Thales said faintly. His name is... Glover and Cohen were completely focused. Even Leoric was staring at him. Thales closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, he slowly opened his eyes and extracted the great name from his distant memory. Don Quixote. At that moment, everyone was stunned. Everyone had a confused look on their faces. Only Thales was still smiling. I was not good at school when I was young. May I ask who he is? Cohen asked carefully. Thales was silent for a moment. He is a knight. A knight who is determined to charge towards the most impossible goal. Glover and Cohen were both stunned. The prince raised his head. His eyes were filled with confusion. But he is still charging. Even if he never succeeds. In the next second, Leoric suddenly took a deep breath. He turned around abruptly and threw the money bag in his hand towards the place with the most vagrants. Thales and the others were all stunned. I still have something to do. Leoric parted ways with them without turning his head back while the coins fell to the ground and the sounds of people snatching the money. Walk around on your own. The Brotherhood has spoken to them. No one will dare to make things difficult for you. Thales frowned. That is not the way out. I know, Leoric answered coldly. They only saw his back as he walked away. But Thales smiled. He knew that it was the direction of the 6th house. Is he angry? Cohen asked carefully as he wiped the last tear from the corner of his eye. No. Thales shook his head. He is lost. Ha! Cohen looked at Leorc in the distance. He scratched the back of his head in confusion. Should we follow him, Your Highness? It will be safer with him. Glover looked around cautiously. No. Thales suddenly felt extremely carefree. He looked at the road that he was once most familiar with. We are not going back. Glover suddenly had a bad premonition. Then where are we going? Cohen asked dumbly. I recommend the Western City Police Station. Thales shook his head. His gaze was firm. Renaissance Palace. Glover frowned. What for? Thales stopped in his tracks. He turned around and stared at the horizon. Glover felt a chill in his heart. He knew that it was the direction of Renaissance Palace. Thales took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Charge. Chapter 610. Eternal Star City, Twilight Star District. Your Highness, why, please wait. Glover avoided a cart that was pulling goods and hurriedly caught up to Thales, who did not stop walking. Forgive me, but have you thought about what you want to do? Cohen followed closely behind him. Perhaps because he knew that his work was meaningful, the police officer was in a good mood. Don't worry, that's Ty. Why? Just like in Ekstedt, he has his own ideas. We just need to obediently do as he says. I haven't thought about it yet, Thales suddenly said. Cohen instantly choked. Thales did not even turn his head. He only cared about moving forward. By the way, I haven't thought about it yet when I was in Ekstedt either. Cohen blinked and watched the prince's back in a daze. Glover sighed. Your Highness, forgive me for being blunt. He caught up to the teenager. No matter what we want to do, we might as well follow Lord Mallow's suggestion and inform Madame Gines first. Mallow's. Thales remembered something and stopped walking. Glover and Cohen stopped. Thankfully, they did not bump into the teenager's back. They then realized that they were standing at the crossroads at the corner of the street. They were facing Renaissance Avenue, which ran from the north to the south of the kingdom. Turning right was the way back to Mindy's Hall. As for turning left, zombies, Thales said. Commodore said that Mallows made arrangements before we entered the palace to find a reason to send you out of Mindy's Hall and fetch me outside the palace. Cohen looked up in confusion. Mallows. Oh, the big brother we met in Mindy's Hall last time. Glover ignored him and nodded without hesitation. His Grace said that the matter at the banquet is not a trivial matter. After you enter the palace, any accidents can happen. He must consider the worst-case scenario and leave some useful manpower for you, so that you will not be alone and helpless, and we will be at a loss without a leader. Thales was stunned at first, then he smiled. That guy, although he goes against me every day, he still has some redeeming qualities, right? Glover nodded cautiously. Before he became the watchman, His Grace was the herald of the command division. He was in charge of delivering Guard Captain Adrian's orders to each division. Most of the time, what he said was the Guard Captain's will. Thales snorted softly. Yeah, that guy looks like he knows a little bit about everything, but he also hides a little bit about everything. As expected of the watchman. Thales sighed in his heart. Zombie, how long have you been in the Royal Guard? Glover was stunned, but he instinctively replied, I'm still inexperienced, Your Highness. Not even 6 years. With complicated emotions in his heart, Thales' gaze pierced through the passing carriages and pedestrians. Through the gaps between their figures, he looked towards the end of the road. Under the setting sun, the towering and heavy dark pyramid stood silently. It was like a huge lock that descended from the sky, firmly pressing down on the heart of Eternal Star City and even the entire constellation. What about Mallows? Glover's expression became stern. Lord Mallows is one of the first batch of royal guards to be reorganized after His Majesty Kessel was crowned. For more than 10 years, the new guards have come and gone, but his lordship has always been there. Thales nodded thoughtfully. So, 18 years. So, he has already surrounded Renaissance Palace and served beside the throne for 18 years. That's why he can be so skilled, so indifferent, so calm, and so far-sighted. Under the hood, Thales stared at the dark and deep ancient palace. Regardless of whether it was stopping me from showing my face in public when I entered the city, dealing with the situation at the royal banquet, or making arrangements before disaster struck. It seems that this is his instinct, his normal way of life. He has seen through it, adapted to it, and is used to it. He deals with it as it comes and accepts it. Just like a veteran actor who is used to a stage and a play, he repeats similar lines countless times. Cohen, who was out of sorts, stared at Renaissance Palace at the end of the road in boredom. He did not bother to hide his yawn. It's already evening, Thales suddenly spoke and interrupted him. Do you know what we are facing now? Glover frowned. Thales sank into deep thought. Thread. Glover and Cohen were both stunned. Thread? Thales nodded. Yes, just like in puppet shows, the strings on the idol's body have two ends. One end is over there, and the other is over here. It involves me, Mallows, and everyone else's every move. Thales stared at the thick and heavy pyramid in the distance, lost in thought. When he was young, the palace was like a layer of clouds floating in the sky. Although it could not be touched, it always made people look up and stare at it. Now, when he could really touch it, Thales slowly stretched out his left hand, bent his thumb and forefinger, and slowly trapped Renaissance Palace in his sight between his fingers. At that moment, it looked exquisite and delicate, as if everything was under his control. However, no matter how he retracted his fingers, all Thales could feel was the rustling autumn wind that blew past his palm. It left no trace behind, only a chill. Just like in Dragon Cloud City, Blade Fang's camp, and the Prison of Bones. The teenager frowned. In everything that happened, there was always a thread that pulled everything together, and in the end, it gathered into a torrent that surged forward. Cohen listened in a daze until he caught hold of a term he could understand. What? You went to the Prison of Bones. That place where you can only enter but not exit. Following Thales' movements, Glover looked at Renaissance Palace in the distance, and he became alert. Thread. You mean, whether it was the accident at the banquet or the disturbance today, you were used and manipulated by someone? Cohen glanced at the zombie, and he became equally alert. What banquet? What accident? What disturbance? Thales shook his head gently. No. Based on past experience, as long as I understand where the thread is, see through it, grab it, and split it open, I can see the exit of the maze, even if there is another maze behind the exit. But Thales' expression became even more solemn. But this time, the teenager said solemnly. This time is a little more special. He stared at the tiny Renaissance Palace between his fingers, and he felt that it was becoming more and more illusory and distant. Glover listened attentively, but did not speak. In the next second, the golden setting sun passed through the gaps between Thales' fingers, illuminating the scar on his palm that was difficult to remove because of the many cuts he made. When he thought of this, a dull pain came from his palm, replacing the illusory chill. It's not so clear, not so specific, and not so direct. The end of the thread at the other end is not even a person. Sometimes, I even feel that everything is just my imagination, and there is no thread at all. Thales put down his palm and exhaled. But that's not the case. The thread still exists, but because there are too many of them, too thick, too dense, and tangled together, I can't start, and it's hard for me to detect them. Cohen was in great pain as he listened, but when he saw that Glover was also puzzled, he immediately felt much more at ease. Because a long time ago, I only needed to solve a single thread. Thales's eyes were burning. The right to inherit the throne of the second prince, King Nuvan's anger, Lampard's ambition, the Archduchess' rule, simple, convenient, and clean. It was already evening, and the number of people on Renaissance Avenue gradually increased. Those who had finished work, those who went to the market, those who took shifts, those who were strolling, and those who were in a hurry were surging with people. The endless stream of people and carriages blocked the view of Renaissance Palace in the distance. But Thales stared at its silhouette. His gaze never lost focus because of the palace's occasional disappearance. But now, the ownership of Blade Fang's camp, the resistance in Western Desert, the undercurrent in Mindy's Hall, the shadow of Renaissance Palace, the actions of the kingdom's secret intelligence department, the stance of the 7 Jade Star attendants, and the meaning of the Star Lake Guards. Thales's expression became more solemn as he spoke. Ever since I returned to the kingdom and stepped into Constellation, there has been more than one thing, one hand, and one person that has been affecting, restricting, and oppressing me. I need to solve more than one thread. The chaos in Western Desert, mallows of the royal guards, the gaze from the throne, the hostility from iris flowers, the accident at the royal banquet, the war in Ekstedt, the agenda of the imperial conference, the encounter in the secret intelligence department, countless figures flash before Thales's eyes, like countless images flashing in his mind. In fact, every time I untie a thread, I sink myself into more, deeper, messier, and more complicated threads, the kingdom, enfeoffment, history, power, and so on. He took a deep breath. I don't know when it started, but what I had to face was no longer just threads. Instead, it was an entire net formed by countless threads. The moment he finished speaking, Thales suddenly felt that the illusory silhouette of Renaissance Palace in the distance began to change. It was as if it had walked out of a painting. The edges and corners were so distinct that they seemed tangible. Glover tried hard to understand the prince's words. Cohen was drowsy from listening, so he decided to let his mind wander. That's why it's ethereal and mysterious. It's empty and formless, and its form can't be seen even in the clouds and fog. But it's also more oppressive and suffocating. The worst thing is that it's closely following my every move, word, and thought. Thales stared at Renaissance Palace in front of him. He felt that the oppressive and tangible feeling became clearer, as if it had a sharp blade, and it made him feel uncomfortable. Under its shadow, I'm no longer the me I know, and I'm no longer the Thales Jade Star who survived in the northern wastes. Every move I make is tightly controlled by it. I can no longer freely make decisions without any worries. Thales touched his heart. But when I draw my sword and look around, I'm at a loss and confused. I don't know where I should slash. Thales exhaled, but his gaze became more determined. Net. Forgive me for being slow, Your Highness. Glover shook his head. I don't quite understand. You don't understand. Cohen snapped out of his daze and was instantly overjoyed. Thales gave him a sidelong glance. You understand. Cohen was stared at, and his tone instantly became awkward. Very good. Thales raised his eyebrows. I knew you understood. Cohen's expression froze on his face. What a pity, Thales sighed and said. Others don't understand. Glover looked at this and that. He was completely at a loss. It's okay. We understand, and that's enough. Thales patted Cohen's shoulder with a gratified expression. In response, Cohen could only force an awkward but polite smile. A few seconds later, Thales snorted and laughed heartily. I'm not joking anymore. Actually, everyone has experienced that feeling, but most of the time, we don't realize it. Thale's tone became serious. For example, you, zombie. You come from a noble family and serve on the throne, but you've been through many hardships in the past, and you're covered in mud. The two of you are entangled with each other. Every time you try to reach out to one of them, the other will roll back like a wave, suffocating you. Glover's expression changed slightly. And you, Cohen. You're alone on the battlefield with only a sword, and you overcome all obstacles. But at the end of your journey, you realize that what you have to face is not just crimes and order, but everything in Lower City District. Cohen was stunned, and he fell into deep thought. Just like me, what you face is an entire net. Thales let out a long sigh and turned around again. He faced the seemingly endless Renaissance Avenue, and Renaissance Palace, which was hidden in countless people. They were silent for a while. Then, Glover's voice was hoarse and sluggish, as if he had encountered some difficulties and obstacles. What should we do? Thale's pupils shrank slowly. The scene reflected in his eyes had Renaissance Palace firmly in his mind. According to what the leader of Blackstreet Brotherhood said, first of all, Thales recalled the madness of Dragon's blood that night, and the corners of his lips curled up subconsciously. We have to change our minds. Glover's expression did not change, but his gaze shifted. Cohen was puzzled. How do we change our minds? Thales lowered his head and looked at the scar on his palm again. The net we face can never be cut, broken free, or even undone. As Thales spoke, he slowly extended his hand towards Renaissance Palace. He spread his fingers and covered every corner of the ancient palace. But it is also because of this, the prince said softly, as if he did not hear anything, you, me, him, and them, all of us are in it. The teenager's tone was cold, and his gaze was indifferent. Glover felt a chill run down his spine. We have been under its control for a long time. Thales clenched his fist tightly, and Renaissance Palace was completely in his palm. We are powerless to escape. In the next moment, Thales resolutely stepped out of the corner of the street and walked onto Renaissance Avenue. Glover and Cohen looked at each other. They were puzzled, but Thales was already far away. They could only chase after him. At this moment, you're... Why? The three of them turned their heads at the same time and saw another cloaked figure hurriedly catching up to them from the other side of the road. When the other person came closer, Thales saw his face clearly and said in surprise, Commodore, you're awake. Gianluca Commodore, the second-class protector of the Royal Guards who was taken down by Cohen and Glover in Laurel Club, panted and trembled in excitement. He looked as if he had just survived a desperate situation. I was scared to death. When I woke up, all of you were gone. There was only a man who was pulling down his pants. Cohen frowned and looked at Glover. The latter was expressionless. Commodore's eyes were filled with tears. I went back to Mindy's Hall. All of you were not there, so I went to Renaissance Palace. The guards also said that all of you did not come, so I could only run to Eastern City District to call for help. Commodore suddenly saw Cohen's figure, and he instantly gritted his teeth. Hey, you're that bastard, Cohen was shocked. He quickly pulled down his hood. Ahem, Lorbeck, I am Lorbeck Dara, Lorbeck Dara. Commodore muttered this name, and his expression suddenly changed drastically. How dare you? He grabbed Cohen's collar. How dare you pretend to be Western City Police Station's Director Lorbeck? Cohen, who was at a loss for what to do after his identity was exposed, lowered his head and leaned forward. Let me tell you, I am an inner city police officer. I know the internal affairs of the police station very well. Thales felt a headache coming on. He coughed. Caribbean. This man is the heir of Walla Hill and Sword of the Twin Towers, Cohen Caribbean. He is now a police officer in the capital. Commodore was stunned. He spent a few seconds thinking about the meaning of this name. Oh, so it's young Master Caribbean. The protector instantly became as enthusiastic as fire, and he smiled like a flower. He loosened his grip on Cohen's collar, and in a very natural manner, he adjusted Cohen's clothes. What a coincidence. I was once a police officer as well. We are in the same profession. It's a misunderstanding. If I knew that you were visiting in secret, Cohen stared at him in a daze. He could not react to the situation. However, in the next second, another sobbing voice traveled into their ears from afar. Your Highness. The few of them were shocked. Another man in civilian clothes moved stiffly towards them with a limp. The passers-by looked at him. Glover saw the man's face clearly, and he covered his forehead in pain. Thales frowned. Aren't you recuperating? The first great protector beside Thales, Danny Doyle pounced on the teenager with sparkling eyes. Yes, Your Highness. But Commodore came to my house to look for me. I heard about what happened in Mindy's hall. Silence. Glover pulled Doyle up rudely and dragged him to the corner of the street. At the same time, he looked around vigilantly and whispered, Waya. His Highness' current alias is Waya. Doyle was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Okay, Waya. Commodore didn't make it clear. He said that all of you went to look for a woman, but you found an androgynous one. Then, a strong and tough man came. Then, he fainted from the pain, and all of you disappeared. Hey, Doyle. It's been a long time. Cohen happily appeared beside Doyle and slapped his back. Arg! Doyle screamed in pain and pounced into Glover's arms. Ha! What's wrong with you? Cohen stretched out his hand in confusion. He looked puzzled. Why do you walk like a duck, and explode with just one slap? Doyle endured the pain in his back and laid on Glover's body. He turned around to take a look. What's going on? Doyle's face was contorted. He pointed at Cohen with his thumb angrily and asked Glover in a low voice, why this guy? Glover pulled Doyle off him without batting an eyelid. You know, His Highness, the fool beside Waya has applied for leave. We couldn't find another fool, so we could only use him as a substitute. Doyle groaned weakly and immediately became puzzled. Oh, the fool's substitute. Wait, who's the fool who applied for leave? Glover pursed his lips tightly. Hey! Both of you. Cohen waved his hand indignantly at the side. Don't speak ill of me behind my back, I can hear what you're saying. I hear. Yes. Yes. Did you hear? I can hear. Did you hear? Glover shrugged at Doyle. Doyle frowned and looked at Cohen, then at Glover, who had regained his cool. In the end, he lowered his head and sighed. All right, so be it if he's a fool. Perhaps I'm really one. Doyle helplessly patted Cohen's shoulder. No matter what, thank you for taking my place and serving His Highness. This time, it was Cohen's turn to be surprised. Ha! What's wrong with you today? You're a little different from usual. Why aren't you talking back? It's nothing. It's just that before I do something, Doyle tightened the clothes on his back and grimaced as he smiled bitterly. You have to weigh the scales first. Once he said that, Glover could not help but look at him in a different light. What the F***CK, Cohen looked at Doyle in surprise. Playboy. You've grown up. Doyle returned him a melancholic smile. So, Cohen was pleased. Without holding back, he slapped Doyle's back again. Listening to Doyle's screams and watching their reunion, Thales curled up the corners of his lips. He suddenly felt that today was not so bad after all. But at that moment, a faintly discernible strange feeling surged in his heart. Thales subconsciously turned around and looked at the crowd behind him. The moment he turned around, the crowd on the street suddenly became restless. It's so noisy behind. What happened? Was there a car accident? The other members of the Star Lake Guards also noticed the commotion and turned around. But the commotion quickly changed its tone. The whispers of the crowd spread into panic. Quick, dodge it. Whose horse is startled? Why did it suddenly go crazy? Who can hold it back? Thales' expression changed. The strange feeling was getting stronger. The next moment, a huge black shadow appeared on the street and charged out of the crowd. It was getting closer and closer to them. Glover, Cohen, Doyle, and Commodore also saw this scene. Their expressions changed. It's charging over here. Run! The panicked whispers turned into fearful screams. The people on the street dodged the black shadow and scattered in all directions. The movement of the black shadow was so great that it stirred up countless strong gusts of wind. It enveloped Thales and his group. Its speed was very oppressive, and it reached them in an instant. Be careful! Before Thales could react, Glover pounced on him and pinned him to the ground. What the? Before Doyle could finish his astonished words, he was also pinned to the ground by Cohen and Commodore. Thales could only feel the huge black shadow sweeping past the top of his head. It brought along strong gusts of wind that were as sharp as blades, causing their cloaks to flutter continuously. And the strange feeling reached its peak. Asterisk thud, thud, asterisk the black shadow landed on the ground behind them. It turned into rhythmic footsteps and gradually moved into the distance. Your Highness, are you all right? Glover got up in a disheveled manner. Damn bastard. Thales, who once again received the Royal Guard's VIP service, spat out the dust in his mouth in pain. He only had time to poke his head out of the zombie's bosom. Doyle pushed away the two men on him. He grimaced in pain due to the double pain of being whipped and falling. Where did this beast come from? How dare it offend the royal family? Damn it, it's back. Asterisk thud, 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 asterisk the hurried sounds of horse hooves rose again. Everyone was shocked again. The huge black shadow in the distance turned around and charged towards them again. Which idiot's horse is this? Galloping in the middle of the street, see if I don't cut him. Cohen rolled up his sleeves angrily. No, a normal frightened horse would not be so persistent. It might have been drugged and is specifically charging towards your highness. Commodore analyzed cautiously. Hey, stop talking. Someone come and pull me up. This came from Doyle, who was groaning in pain. Glover's ruthlessness was aroused. He jumped up, gritted his teeth, and drew his sword. Kill it. Wait a minute. But Thales suddenly extended his hand, pressed down on his sword, and stood up. The teenager took a deep breath, took a few steps forward, and opened his arms towards the black shadow that was charging towards him. Glover subconsciously extended his hand to stop the prince, but he did not manage to grab anything. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. With lightning speed, the black shadow swept up the dust and charged towards Thales. No, 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 Doyle was terrified when he saw this. In the next second, the black shadow's hooves stomped on the ground continuously. It slowed down drastically and stirred up a lot of dust. Before the dumbfounded eyes of the crowd, the black shadow turned from a rapid gallop to a brisk walk, then to a normal gait. In the end, it arrived in front of Thales with small, elegant steps and lowered its head obediently. Beautiful. You didn't bump into anything. Your posture when crossing obstacles is much more skillful. Thales smiled and extended his hand to stroke the black horse. Good girl. The black horse's eyes were bright, and it snorted happily. It extended its head forward and clamped Thales between its chin and neck. It rubbed against him back and forth. Yes, I know. I missed you too. Thales felt a little helpless when it hugged him intimately, but the fear in his heart turned into calmness. He gently combed the other party's mane and said in a gentle voice, "Don't worry, Jenny." The Star Lake guards, as well as Cohen, were dumbfounded at the scene. This is... Doyle, you read a lot. Tell me, what is this scene? Cohen prodded Doyle in a daze. Let me. Don't touch my back. Let me think. When Doyle saw that Thales was immersed in joy and did not have time to care about their situation, he frowned and thought for a while. A new lover. Commodore was observant. He waved his hands and dispersed the curious onlookers behind the mess. Disperse, disperse, disperse. The police officer is here. What's there to see? Have you never seen a second-generation official racing, horse racing? His sternness had some effect. The crowd slowly dispersed, but it was not as fast as Glover's methods. The zombie walked forward with a cold expression and took the money pouch from Doyle's waist without any explanation. He tore open the pouch and sprinkled coins and bills into the distance. Amid Doyle's indignant protests and the crowd's bustling commotion, Glover and the others escorted Thales and his new steed away from the crime scene. But before they could go far, Glover turned around vigilantly. A few figures did not care about the coins scattered all over the ground. They went against the flow and passed through the crowd. They ran towards them while panting. "Uncle, it's in front. It's right in front. Take it easy, boy. Where did you put the horse trap? That thing is useless. Do you remember? The last time Mute fell into it, it ran around and flew a kite for the whole afternoon. We have to tempt it with good horse food. Or wear His Highness clothes. Damn it, how many times has it done this? It bullies the weak and fears the strong. When that dead face was around, it never dared to be so arrogant. Don't stop me. This time, I'm going to chop this crazy horse and feed it to Mute." The Star Lake guards stood in formation vigilantly and blocked the path of the newcomers. The noisy chatter stopped abruptly. The newcomers stopped in unison and looked at the Star Lake guards warily. Glover frowned. There were 4 newcomers. Although they were travel-worn, they were fully armed. The older man carried a sword and shield on his back, the younger man carried a spear and a spear on his back, and one of them wore a strange mask that covered the lower half of his face from his chin. Their leader was a handsome young man with a long sword at his waist. He stared blankly at the black horse that was being intimate with Thales. But their positions, Glover became more vigilant, were extremely professional. They spread out to the left and right, guarding each other's blind spots. They were not gangsters, but veterans who had been on the battlefield and seen blood. "Ah! Ah! Ah!" Cohen suddenly screamed. His face lit up as he rushed between the 2 groups of people. When the strangers saw Cohen, their expressions changed as well. Some were pleasantly surprised, some were disgusted, and some were even more disgusted after being pleasantly surprised. I know him, I know him." Cohen's lips parted as he danced around. He opened his arms to the young man leading the group. "Let me introduce you. This is my..." But the young man only passed by Cohen in a daze and ignored his embrace. Cohen missed his embrace and could only raise his arms awkwardly. Until he saw the next person. Before him, the strange man wearing the silver mask snorted coldly and glared at the police officer with resentment. Cohen's smile became extremely ugly. His arms went limp, and his voice trembled. "Friend?" On the other side, the handsome young man's breathing quickened. His chest rose and fell as he walked towards Thales step by step. His face was filled with disbelief. Your Highness. Thales, who was holding Jenny's hand, looked back at him and flashed a faint smile. Waya. The handsome young man, Waya, who had not been seen for a long time, took a deep breath. His expression changed from disbelief to ecstasy. He quickly caught up to Thales and said, "Your Highness, it's you, it's really you." But Glover raised his arm coldly and stood between Waya and Thales. Waya snapped out of his daze and stopped in front of Thales. He glanced at Glover and forced himself to recall Constellation's etiquette. He embarrassedly tidied up his messy and casual expression due to the many days of traveling, and bowed in a respectful and old-fashioned manner. Thales opened his mouth, but could only say a few words. "Yes, it's me." Waya blinked hard and adjusted his breathing. He turned around in surprise. "I was just talking to the mute." The strange man wearing the mask snorted coldly and hoarsely and turned his head away. Waya ignored him. He only sized up Thales excitedly and spoke incoherently. "You don't know, when you were kidnapped in Dragon Cloud City. Uncle Jenned said that it was all your plan, but I couldn't believe it." The elderly man with the sword and shield on his back revealed a faint smile. "The Star Killer checked every single one of us from head to toe, until he returned to Dragon Cloud City covered in injuries." Waya was so excited that he spoke incoherently. "Until the news of your return to the kingdom came, but Thales smiled. He smiled in relief. In the next second, he stepped over Glover and the distance between the prince and the attendant. He extended his arms in a carefree manner, and under the attendant's surprised gaze, he hugged Waya tightly. Everyone's expressions changed at the same time. "Thank you, Waya." Thales pressed his chin against Waya's shoulder and tried hard to stop his voice from trembling. "Thank you for coming back." Waya was also stunned. He looked at the prince's unseemly and sincere action, and he did not know where to place his hands. Your Highness." Thales took a deep breath. He suddenly felt that the net he was in was no longer as thick and heavy as it used to be. You don't know what this means to me." Waya hesitated for a few seconds, but he still smiled in the end. He hugged the teenager in a natural manner and patted his back lightly. "I know, Your Highness, I know, just like before." "Yes." Thales closed his eyes. "Just like before." What the F***ck, this time, it was Doyle's turn to be dumbfounded. He stared at the newcomer who was being hugged by the prince. "What's going on now?" Cohen sighed. When he remembered his military career, he sighed and said, "Unfinished business." Chapter 6:11. A few seconds later, Glover coughed stiffly. Thales then let go of Waya and rubbed his eyes. "Your Highness." Waya held Thales' shoulders and sighed. "It's been half a year. You've grown taller again." Thales smiled. "I want to say you too, but..." Thales patted him on the shoulder in relief. "I'm glad you're back." Thales left Waya. With mixed feelings, he opened his arms and walked to the next person. "But you..." When Ralph saw this, he quickly retreated while his hand gestures did not stop. "No." There was a hint of fear in his eyes. "Don't." "I won't." Thales, who knew the man's personality very well, smiled in a bashful manner. He lowered his spread arms again. "All right, you can forget about it." "Not bad, at least he knows his place," Doyle, who was watching from the side, said gloomily. Thales then turned around and hugged the others one by one. "Jenned, how are you? And you, Willow, who uses 2 guns?" "Your Highness." Jenned the veteran was very calm. "I'm just changing my shift." "Your Highness." The former recruit, Willow, looked around excitedly. "So, Uncle didn't lie to me. We're really in the capital." It's much better than that big village in Dragon Cloud City. After Thales finished exchanging greetings with the old subordinates he was most familiar with, Cohen seized the opportunity to approach him. "You're back, Brother Waya." The police officer hugged Waya excitedly, almost lifting him off the ground. "Big brother. What kind of address is that?" Waya had a suspicious look on his face. He was obviously not as enthusiastic towards him as he was towards Thales. "Wait, why did you say real?" But Cohen didn't care. He lifted him off the ground and spun him around 3.5 times. "I missed you so much." Amidst Waya's complaints and curses, Cohen generously hugged everyone. Until he saw Rolf. The Phantom Wind follower's eyes were cold, but under Waya's warning gaze, he only let out a beast-like growl at Cohen before turning around and leaving. "All right." The police officer scratched his head awkwardly and shrugged at Rolf's back. "Yes, I'm fine. I'm happy to see you too. Let's have a drink sometime, hey?" Doyle frowned and nudged Cohen before he pointed at Rolf. "He's ignoring you." Cohen turned his head, his expression changing from an embarrassed smile to one of gnashing his teeth. "I know." Glover coughed and attracted Thales and Waya's attention. "Your Highness." Doyle, on the other hand, elegantly straightened his clothes, scrutinized the newcomers, and then looked hopefully at the prince. Thales snapped out of his trance. "Everyone, I really want to introduce you, but now is clearly not the time." He patted Glover's shoulder and pounded Waya's chest. "Let's get to know each other on the way." Doyle's hopeful gaze dimmed, and he felt incredibly wronged. Thales sucked in a deep breath and took his steed from Commodore's hands. "Are you ready?" Jenny whinnied happily. Thales chuckled softly and rejected Commodore's kind offer to crouch down and help him up the horse. He recalled Nicholas' equestrian lessons, and the sin of Hell's River was activated at will. He stepped on the saddle in a straightforward manner and flipped himself up the horse. "Let's go." Hence, the group of people who were excited, agitated, curious, and puzzled followed Jenny's footsteps and stepped onto Renaissance Avenue. As a protector, Doyle took stiff steps and was about to catch up to Thales' right side, but another figure had already taken a step ahead of him. "Thank you, but I am His Highness' attendant." Waya walked beside Thales' horse and extended his hand to reject Doyle. His words were polite, but there was no room for refusal. "It is my duty to serve by his side." Doyle's eyes widened. "You are the prince's attendant." Doyle landed beside Waya and whispered in displeasure, "What's your name?" "Waya." Doyle narrowed his eyes. "Waya what?" "Waya." "Casso," the attendant said coldly. Casso, I was wondering which," Doyle snorted softly. Then, he remembered something, and his expression instantly changed. Casso." Doyle instantly became friendly and amiable. "Oh my, Brother Waya. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. How's your father, Count Casso?" Waya was not good at dealing with such enthusiasm. He could only show an ugly smile. On the other side, Ralph sneered. Waya's gaze turned cold. He turned to Doyle and said, "This is Madeira Ralph. This is Madeira Ralph. In fact, he followed His Highness even earlier than I did." Ralph choked on his smile. Doyle turned his head. His eyes lit up again. "Brother, you're Ralph. Wow, good name. Your parents are really talented. Hey, your mask is so cool. Where did you buy it? I know you don't like to talk." "It's okay, I like people who cherish their words the most, because I know people like you. You don't usually speak, but when it comes to critical moments, you say wise words. Speaking of which, I am untalented. My name is Danny Doyle. I am the protector of His Highness' personal guards. Let's go to Red Street Market together when you are free. It's okay, you are welcome. I am very familiar with that place. Even Blood Bottle Gang has to give me face. Brother, you don't have to say anything. I know. Behind them, Cohen could not hold it in anymore. He convulsed with laughter. Ha ha ha, you don't know. He is a mute. He can't speak. Doyle, who was disrupted, turned around angrily. So what if he's a mute? Can't a mute speak? You are, Doyle's words came to a halt. He turned around pitifully and looked at the gloomy Ralph with a fawning and aggrieved look. That, I am sorry, brother. Cohen took pleasure in Doyle's misfortune and mouthed, idiot. But Doyle quickly thought of a way to remedy the situation. It's okay. You don't have to say anything. I understand. Doyle stuck out his thumb and patted Ralph's shoulder. He did not care about the latter's increasingly cold gaze. You are a real man. For His Highness, it is worth risking my life. So what if I become a mute? Ha 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 ha. Cohen covered his mouth and laughed viciously again. What now? Doyle scowled at him. The police nodded and teased Doyle. The reason why he can't speak is because I broke his throat during a street fight. Ralph turned around abruptly. His gaze was as sharp as a knife. Cohen shuddered and stopped abruptly. He reacted and made an apologetic expression at Ralph. He laughed awkwardly. Ahem, sorry. Ahem. But Doyle curled up the corners of his lips and poked the police officer smugly. I think he heard you. Cohen turned around awkwardly. He was furious. I know. Ralph snorted angrily and left the row. Damn it. Another arrogant idiot has come to the prince's side. As he thought of this, he glanced at Waya. What, isn't one enough? Thales rode on his horse and asked Waya, who was the closest to him. How did you come back? It's a long story. Waya shook his head. Viscount Nemain is right. With you gone, we are insignificant to Dragon Cloud City, so the Archduchess ordered us to be released. Of course, the Star Killer was reluctant at first, but they were about to set off for war, put Ray. Thales thought of his old friend. Where is he? Viscount Nemain left halfway. Waya was also nostalgic. He said he had other important matters to attend to. Thales chuckled and shook his head. As always, mysterious. Waya perked up. In short, once we left Dragon Cloud City, it was much easier, but Thales thought of something and remembered what he saw at the royal banquet. Wait, according to Little Pot Lid, aren't you still stuck at the border between the two countries? The prince was puzzled. Why are you back so soon? Waya shook his head. No, Your Highness, we returned to Constellation 2 weeks ago. We stopped for a few days on the way. He was slightly puzzled. Little Pot Lid. Pot Lid. Oh. You mean the Archduke's son of Reformation Tower? Didn't you send him? Thales was stunned. No, I didn't. Wait a minute, let's recall. Thales took a deep breath and recalled Levi Trent Ida, who came to him for help during the royal banquet and only asked to stay by his side for 5 minutes. That Little Pot Lid. So, on your way back, you did meet Levi Trent Ida, the Archduke's son of Reformation Tower, right? Waya recalled carefully. Yes. We met him a few weeks ago, and he even paid for our food and lodging so that we could eat and drink before continuing on our journey. He claimed that you had entrusted Archduchess Aroma, and the Archduchess had entrusted it to him. He came to visit us on the way. The attendant asked doubtfully. Isn't that so? Thales stroked Jenny's mane and frowned. No. In fact, Levi only met me for the first time last night. He told me that you were stuck at the border between the two countries by the people of Black Sand region, and that he was trying to mediate. He came to inform you that you were safe. Thales slowly reacted. Isn't that so? Waya shook his head fiercely. No. Thales and Waya were silent for a while. So you didn't ask him to inform me. So he wasn't sent by you or the Archduchess. Both of them figured it out and exhaled in unison. Levi Trentide. What a good way to get a prince with nothing. Quite like his father, Thales muttered the other's name and recalled the other's sly and flattering smile. He said indignantly, what a deep scheme. Waya was anxious. I'm sorry, did you lose anything because of this? Thales stroked Jenny's neck and said gloomily, yes. A few pieces of lettuce, a few minutes of chatting time, and a resume of, I had a pleasant conversation with Prince Thales. Waya looked confused. But the prince immediately felt relieved. Fair enough, because I didn't really want to help him. Thales recalled Levi running from both ends and dealing with the information gap, and could not help but chuckle softly. Your Highness, how are you? After the joy of meeting again, Waya was as serious as ever and said worriedly, we heard that you were made a duke, but there was an accident at the banquet. Thales waved his hand nonchalantly. It's okay, the prince said in relief, you know, it's my banquet. If nothing happens, he shrugged his shoulders and spoke his next words in his mind. Then should I still be called Thales? Waya lowered his head slowly. Your Highness, the attendant said sadly, I'm very sorry. I couldn't stay by your side and protect you. Thales looked at him and curled up the corners of his lips. No, in fact, you helped me a lot. The prince bent down and patted his shoulder, winking with his left eye. Especially your name. Waya looked up with a puzzled expression. Thales did not explain further, intending to leave the meaning of his words for Waya to ponder on. The prince raised his eyebrows and remembered something. By the way, Ida, where is she? Waya shook his head. I don't know. The moment we stepped into Eternal Star City, she disappeared. Uncle Jenned told us not to be nervous. Instead of worrying about her, we should worry about ourselves. In fact, with Lady Aida's personality, even I find it strange that she could follow us safely all the way. As expected, it's Ida. Thales sighed. That's because without all of you, she would have lost her way. Waya thought for a while, then came to a realization. It's okay. Thales gestured at Glover and the others with his chin. Without her, we can still get things done. I saw that your guards have been upgraded. Waya looked at Glover, who was still vigilant, and there was a hint of loneliness in his eyes. Especially this man. I can feel that he's very powerful. Yes. Thales turned his head around and looked at Doyle, Commodore, and the others. He sighed and said, I have my own royal guards. Even though there are a lot of problems and I'm in a state of disunity, even though the leader likes to go against me, even though he can't even protect himself now, but without my attendant by my side, there's always something missing. Thales patted Waya's shoulder, and the latter's eyes burned with fighting spirit again. Of course, they are just guards, and I am an attendant. We are different. Waya was full of confidence. Ah. Thales held the reins again. He looked at Renaissance Palace, which was getting closer and closer. Of course you are. Glover, who was moving forward quietly, suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned his head and saw the young man who had just hugged the prince staring at him with a burning gaze. The valiant young man extended his hand in a friendly manner. I am Waya, His Highness' attendant. Glover stared at the young man's hand warily. 2 seconds later, he tentatively extended his hand and shook hands with Waya. Caleb Glover. Royal Guard, Star Lake Guards, First Class Vanguard. Wyatt smiled. Thank you. Glover responded with a puzzled gaze. The prince's return to the kingdom seems to have settled down, and he has boundless prospects. However, those of us who have been by His Highness' side for years know that there are countless undercurrents and dangers lurking behind the scenes. Wyatt looked at Thales, who was deep in thought on his steed. He needs more help. But he looked at Doyle, sighed, and said, but today, when we meet again, among the people around him, only you seem a little more reliable. Glover's expression became slightly better. It seems that there are still normal people around His Highness. But he paused for a moment. Wait, you said that your name is Wyatt. Wyatt's voice was solemn. Yes. Glover's expression was a little strange. Just Wyatt. No, other names. My name is Wyatt Casso, if that's what you mean. Glover looked like he had a sudden realization. Oh, so you are the real Wyatt. Wyatt was stunned. Sorry. It's nothing, it's just that. Glover glanced at Thales' back. His Highness often talks about you. Wyatt glanced at Thales, who was on the horse, and a special feeling welled up in him. We were supposed to serve by His Highness' side and protect him. But not only did we fail to fulfill our duties, we even got ourselves into trouble and almost became a burden. But not only did His Highness not blame us, he was even concerned about our safety. Wyatt sighed. How can we repay this kindness? But after he said this, Wyatt vaguely felt that Glover's expression when he looked at him seemed to be even weirder. You, actually have already repaid him. Wyatt was puzzled. Why? Because your name is Wyatt, Zombie replied briefly. Wyatt was stunned again. That's strange. The attendant could not figure it out. His Highness seemed to have said that before. Does my name have any meaning? Glover coughed. It's nothing, but you better not go to Red Street Market. Why? Because your name is Wyatt. Wyatt was even more puzzled. Until Doyle's voice cut in. Oh my, brother Wyatt, ignore him. You should have asked me about the Royal Guards, especially the defense division that protects the country, hiss. Wyatt turned his head around in shock and saw Doyle approach him with tears in his eyes. Danny, you. What's wrong? It's nothing. Doyle pressed his back and looked like he was about to cry. It's just that, my back hurts. Back? Wyatt was shocked. Doyle panted and looked like a delicate flower waiting to be cherished. You know, there was a banquet last night. Work injury, professional risk, banquet, work injury, back pain. Wyatt's expression became more and more puzzled. But Doyle looked desolately at Glover, whose expression was already very unpleasant. By the way, Glover, your back hurts a lot too, right? The zombie turned his head around coldly. No, I can handle it. Actually, you don't have to force yourself. Doyle sighed weakly. It's all Officer Mallow's fault. He was too aggressive with us, too forceful. My back, I feel like it's going to split open. If we knew this would happen, we wouldn't have done that last night. Glover froze in his tracks. Wyatt's expression was strange. What did you do last night? Doyle looked up. His smile was bitter but gratified. It's okay. That was just me and Glover. We were just impulsive. He looked at the zombie with sparkling eyes. Right, Glover. Impulsive. Wyatt's gaze became stranger. Glover was instantly stunned. He wanted to explain, but in the end, he just snorted angrily and walked forward. Doyle, who was left behind, raised his hand and teased. Hey, it's just a joke. Don't be so petty. Glover gritted his teeth and looked at Doyle. Then, he looked at Cohen, who was giggling foolishly with Willow. As expected. Lillian is right. All idiots are from the same family. They're all F*King related. Behind Thales, the others were also trying their best to get to know each other and familiarize themselves with their new teammates, such as Commodore and Jenned, who were flattering each other. Commodore patted Jenned's shoulder and praised him. By the looks of you, you've been in the military before. Jenned gave him a thumbs up. By the looks of your habits, you're obviously a professional bodyguard. Commodore shook his head humbly. You flatter me. I'm just an untalented person. I was once in the inner city's police station, Jenned said courteously. You flatter me. I've only worked in the Starlight Brigade and the city defense team. Wow, the famous Starlight Brigade. So, you're a veteran, a war hero. Commodore's eyes brightened. TSK, the police officers in the inner city are all in charge of important people's protection and internal supervision. Even the city defense teams of the various departments are under their control. Jenned lamented from the bottom of his heart. Those are just rumors from outsiders. I'm just trying to get by. By the way, how did you go to Northland to follow His Highness? Commodore asked curiously. What hero? It's unbearable. How did you become a royal guard from a police officer? Jenned asked politely. Commodore waved his hand humbly. Speaking of which, I'm lucky. 6 years ago, we gloriously uncovered a series of corruption cases in the city defense team of Eastern City District. I was recommended. Jenned shook his head in a self-deprecating manner. Sigh, speaking of which, I was unlucky. 6 years ago, when I was still in the city defense team of Eastern City District, I was framed for corruption and bribery, and I was implicated. When he said this, Jenned and Commodore's smiles froze at the same time. They turned their heads at the same time and looked at each other in shock. A few seconds later, the two of them turned their heads stiffly and mechanically, and their conversation fell completely silent. Just like that, the newly gathered group of people talked at once. Some were travel-worn, some were calm, some were used to it, and some were uncomfortable. They surrounded Thales, who was at the center of the group, and they moved forward on their horses. They attracted countless gazes along the way. They looked like a group of disbanded soldiers. Thales swayed as he rode on his horse, but he had a vague feeling that he was hallucinating. They were just like 6 years ago, the diplomat group that was hastily formed. They did not even know each other, and they all set off in a hurry. They trod on the snow and headed north to an unknown path. But now, Thales stared at Renaissance Avenue and Renaissance Palace at the end of it. He did not know what to think. Your Highness, Wyas said with a sigh. Perhaps you don't know what returning to Constellation, returning to Eternal Star City, and reuniting with you means to us. Thales turned his head around. Oh. Wyas stared at the familiar streets and sky, and his tone became lighter. It feels like the journey has ended, and we no longer have to work hard. And we can rest now. Thales was silent for a while before he spoke awkwardly. About that, Wyas, right now, we might not be able to rest yet. We can't rest. Wyas' expression froze for a moment. Your Highness, I'm sorry. Thales took a deep breath and looked seriously at the attendant who had followed him for 6 years. Wyas, do you trust me? Clang, Wyas subconsciously wanted to nod, but he stopped when he raised his head halfway. No, Your Highness, I've learned. I have a bad feeling. The last time you asked me this, Wyas recalled Thales' glorious deeds in Northland. He was first terrified, then suspicious. You asked me to find Chapman Lampard. This name attracted the attention of his companions. Most of them turned their heads and looked at the prince. Thales' smile froze slightly. Just say it, Your Highness, you. Waya hesitantly looked at the smiling prince. What do you want now? Thales exhaled and laughed bitterly. Yes, I am very sorry. You went through so much to return to Eternal Star City. I shouldn't have gotten you involved. But when Waya looked at the prince, his vigilant expression suddenly relaxed. He lowered his head and smiled. Fine, Your Highness, you're right. Waya raised his head in relief and smiled bitterly. You're still you, after all. If nothing happens, he did not continue, but his expression became solemn. He punched his chest. No matter what you want to do, this life and this body are yours to command. I will not hesitate to die for you. This made Thales a little embarrassed. He twitched the corner of his mouth. Well, it's not that bad. Besides, Waya unclenched his fist, as if he had let go of a huge rock. We are people who have followed you through mountains of blades and seas of fire in Dragon Cloud City. Waya's smile was bright. There is nothing in this world that can scare us anymore. At that moment, Thales sank into silence. All sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. The teenager looked up. Really? Waya looked at Ralph and gestured with his chin. The Phantom Wind follower's gaze was cold. He gestured for them to move forward. Thales smiled in tacit understanding and looked at the others. We will follow you wherever you go. Jennard bowed deeply. Willow, who was beside him, also bowed nervously. The royal guards will naturally go through fire and water for you. Commodore's face was filled with loyalty. Thales nodded. Doyle looked to the left and right before he cleared his throat. You are Your Highness. We should listen to you. That is true. Doyle's emotions were initially stirred up, but they slowly calmed down. But you also saved my family. He patted the horse's belly with great emotion. Not every prince can choose not to sacrifice his pawn. Jenny turned her head around and neighed fiercely. Doyle, who had been brewing his emotions, was so frightened that he immediately retracted his hand. You have listened to my story, Your Highness. While everyone laughed, Glover was silent for a while before he spoke slowly. I will listen to you as well. Thales stared at him deeply. Thank you. When Cohen saw that everyone's gazes were directed at him, he was extremely nervous. He struggled for a long time before he came up with a strange word. Don Quixote. Charge. Aside from Glover, everyone else was stunned. They sized up Cohen as if they were looking at an idiot. Thales snorted and laughed heartily. But, yes. The teenager took a deep breath and sat up straight. Don Quixote. Very good, the second prince said solemnly. Everyone, listen up. We are going to Renaissance Palace now. Wyatt tightened his grip on his single-edged sword and answered calmly, Of course, what do you want us to do? Thales did not answer immediately. He looked straight ahead and walked forward along Renaissance Avenue until he ran into the dark and deep Great Pyramid. That was Renaissance Palace. It was a net. It was also his windmill. At that second, Thales curled up the corners of his lips and spoke softly. Rebellion. In an instant, the group, including Cohen, who had been talking and laughing, suddenly became quiet. The street was still bustling with activity. People came and went, and it was filled with the smoke of a citizen's life. It was a stark contrast to the dead silence of this small group. It felt like a century had passed. Conspiracy, conspiracy, Wyatt's hoarse voice came out with great difficulty, but he could not form a sentence. In this atmosphere where everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter, Thales raised his head and turned his head around. Tell me. The setting sun was golden. With Renaissance Palace as a backdrop, the young duke's smile was clear, and his attitude was calm. What does it feel like to be a king? No one answered him. Only the black horse, Jenny, who did not know much about the world, neighed excitedly. She continued to take small steps in response to her master's caress. Happy and excited. A journey into the unknown. End of this chapter. Chapter 6:12. Renaissance Palace, Ballard Room. The setting sun shone through the stone window and cast a long shadow on the conference table, like blades of gold and black. There's such a good thing. Constellation's Minister of Trade, Viscount Kenny put down the Jade City Substitute Servitude petition that had just been delivered to the conference room with a doubtful expression. That master of iris flowers. Kenny looked at his peers at the Imperial Conference. Duke Covendier actually volunteered to pay taxes to substitute servitude, reduce the number of recruits in Jade City, and even support the royal family's expansion of the regular army to fill in the important national defense positions left behind by the recruits. The ministers at the Imperial Conference looked at each other. Only the scarred man from the kingdom's secret intelligence department, who had returned with this petition, stood quietly by the side without saying a word. Setting aside his position, doesn't he know the risks of doing so? Viscount Kenny narrowed his eyes, his expression subtle. If Jade City really does as they say in the letter, challenging tradition and shaking their interests. When every conscripted person in every level of fief refuses to serve the Lord because of this reason, Covendier will become a vassal, no, the target of the entire kingdom's noble system. Not the entire system. Military advisor Sauter Ryder was in high spirits, excited by the arrival of the letter. Only those aristocratic suzerains who are conservative, old-fashioned and backward, stubbornly clinging to the conscription of militia, and unwilling to accept taxes in lieu of servitude. Viscount Kenny put down the letter and said slyly, "That's pretty much everyone except the king's partisans." As soon as he said that, the Imperial Conference burst into laughter. This letter came at the right time. It speaks up for us and shifts the pressure, Sauter said with a smile. Whether it's the reduction of the Jade Star private army or the expansion of the regular army, we have strong political support and foreign ministers, as well as the substitute servitude tax paid by Jade City. Kirkirk, the budget issue you mentioned, but the chief of finance rolled his eyes and did not comment. On the other side, Gilbert took the letter with iris flowers wax seal from Kenny's hands and studied it carefully, refusing to miss a single word. Even though this was the third time. Finally, someone realized that the Foreign Affairs Minister's expression was extremely unpleasant, which was incompatible with the relaxed atmosphere of the conference. This letter. Gilbert mumbled, "What exactly is it, old friend?" Sauter noticed Gilbert's state and looked worried. "Is there any problem?" The silence of the few people in the meeting affected the atmosphere just now, and Ballard Room gradually quietened down. Gilbert did not answer. He only took a deep breath and slowly raised his head to look at the end of the long table. It was as if he was asking for an answer. However, on the other side, the king's figure was hidden in the darkness and did not move for a long time. Until another chubby hand reached out from the side. What a coincidence. Just when we were thinking about how to reduce the number of recruits without incurring public anger, and how to find the budget to expand the regular army, the host of the Imperial Conference, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom, the Duke of the Eastern Sea, Bob Cullen, took the petition with a rare sullen expression. When we were still treading on thin ice, fearing that this matter would shake the foundation of the country and cause a civil war, this letter came. Giving people, giving money, and giving gossip. Prime Minister Cullen's words caused everyone in the Imperial Conference to fall into deep thought. Cullen's gaze left the beautiful and calm handwriting on the paper and glanced suspiciously at the scar-faced spy from the kingdom's secret intelligence department on the other side. But the scar-faced man remained quiet and respectful. He turned a deaf ear and did not say a word. The Duke shifted his fat belly, waved the letter in his hand, and snorted softly, "That's right. Where's Zayn himself?" The scar-faced man seemed to have just returned to his senses and replied respectfully, "It is reported that the Duke of South Coast has left the capital and returned to Jade City to deal with urgent matters." Urgent matters? Cullen re-examined Zayn's letter, occasionally looking at the end of the long table, and let out an unsettling laugh. "Indeed, it's too urgent, too urgent." It was obviously good news, but the unusual attitudes of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister left the elites of the Imperial Conference bewildered. They all looked at the owner of the room. But King Kessel remained seated in his seat, not moving an inch. Only the setting sun behind him shone countless golden pillars of light through the window and enveloped him. From afar, he looked like a blade guarding the throne. Or a prison pen. "Prime Minister, Your Grace." Viscount Kenny asked tentatively. But Cullen only raised his finger slightly with an amused expression. "Sodder, I thought at first." Prime Minister Cullen's words were like the evening bell of a monastery, gloomy and meaningful. "Your meticulous report on the war situation in the north today, and your extreme praise of Axtet's lesson, was just to show goodwill to Prince Thales and praise his little lover from Dragon Cloud City." Military advisor, Sodder Ryder was momentarily stunned. "And your exaggerated exaggeration of the accident at Blade Fang's camp, blindly belittling the recruits, and strongly advocating for the expansion of the regular army, was just a pretense. At most, you're asking for an exorbitant price, and you'll pay the price accordingly." Chief of Finance, Kirkirk Man curled his lips. But now, looking at this letter, Prime Minister Cullen glanced at the iris emblem on the letter, then turned to the king and shook his head. "Your Majesty, you came prepared for today's meeting." Kessel V's eyebrows twitched slightly. The Prime Minister closed the petition and smiled leisurely. Just like before, when the regular army of the royal family went to Western Desert to clean up the Great Desert and welcome His Highness, they also came prepared. The ministers frowned at the implication of these words. Among the crowd, Gilbert trembled slightly. He stared at the king from afar with a bitter gaze. But the Prime Minister's next words were baffling. "Is it Sand King? Or whispers? Or both in one?" Sand King. Whispers. At that moment, the ministers of the Imperial Conference looked at each other, confused. Beyond the long table, the sleeve of the scar-faced man moved without anyone noticing. But the ministers quickly noticed that at the end of the long table, the king's gaze was fixed on Duke Cullen, and he paid no attention to anyone else. "No need to be surprised, Your Majesty. Midier even asked for my opinion back then." Prime Minister Cullen did not seem to care if anyone answered. He just sighed and muttered to himself. "At that time, although I was already plump, I was at least a fat man in the prime of his life." The old duke's words were filled with emotion and desolation. "Now, when I lower my head, I can no longer see my toes." Duke Cullen looked up. "What about you?" Amidst the confusion, everyone subconsciously looked at the end of the long table, at the silent and majestic figure that was as still as a statue. "Bob." After a few seconds of silence, the Iron Hand King spoke expressionlessly. "You're not just fat." At that moment, the rays of the setting sun converged into countless golden blades, lying between the two of them. But the Prime Minister did not seem to notice and remained calm. "I'm old." The Iron Hand King's voice was no longer thick and powerful. It actually had the sharpness of a knife cutting through ice. "And tired." King Kessel and Duke Cullen's gazes crossed the long table and met in the air. The ministers all frowned. "Yes, I'm tired." A few seconds later, Cullen avoided King Kessel's gaze and said slowly, "Not like the kingdom's prosperity, where the wheels roll forward." The Duke of Eastern Sea slowly lowered his head and snorted indifferently, looking like an ordinary old man who had no regrets in his old age. "If it's not this horse, then it's that one. Anyway, we have to pick a horse to pull the carriage, right?" King Kessel's gaze was cold and he did not answer. But you're not him, Cullen said the last sentence and closed his eyes wearily. Not him. King Kessel still did not speak. At that moment, the atmosphere in Ballard Room was no longer relaxed. In the face of the obscure confrontation between the king and the duke, everyone was very puzzled, but dared not speak. Except for one person. Your Majesty. Gilbert looked up with a complicated gaze and became the next person to break the silence. Please forgive me for overstepping my authority. He raised Zayn's handwritten letter steadily and showed the iris emblem on it. But when was this petition written? Last night. In the wee hours of the morning. Gilbert's gaze shot straight at the throne. At that moment, the usually gentle cunning fox of Constellation's gaze was sharp, even a little aggressive. Prime Minister Cullen snorted and added, intentionally or unintentionally, or just now. Low whispers could be heard among the officials. A few seconds later, the king slowly turned his head and shifted the focus of his gaze to his once most trusted foreign minister. His gaze pierced through the setting sun like ice, instantly dispersing the warmth. King Kessel stared at Gilbert but did not say a word. The atmosphere of the imperial conference became increasingly heavy and suffocating, until someone could not take it anymore and interrupted. Is it because of the royal banquet? On the other side, the kingdom's chief of finance, Kirkirk Man gulped and asked cautiously. He knew that the matter was of great importance and no longer acted like a rascal. I left early at the banquet, but I later heard that the Duke of Star Lake and the Duke of South Coast had a little discord during the banquet. The Duke of Star Lake, the Duke of South Coast, royal banquet. As soon as these words were spoken, whispers once again arose around the conference table. Discord. Yes, if one brought a sword to the banquet, assisted an assassin, kidnapped a guest, and threatened the prince, it could also be considered a little discord. The king snorted coldly and interrupted the whispers in the imperial conference. A little misunderstanding. King Kessel's words were like the final word, sonorous and forceful. It has been resolved. Resolved. Gilbert's heart sank when he heard this. No one at the conference table was stupid enough to ask, how was it resolved? Viscount Kenny and the Minister of Agriculture, Lord Croppen, looked at each other and interrupted the current awkwardness. Very well, then the Duke of South Coast still wishes to mend his relationship with us, unlike the one-eyed dragon from the land of cliffs, that's it? But Gilbert's voice rang out again and disrupted their efforts. Just because he acted against Prince Thales behind the scenes, and you held on to him as a bargaining chip. Uncharacteristically, Gilbert was relentless in his questioning. His tone was stern and urgent. That's why there's this letter. Everyone could sense that the tension between the king and the foreign affairs minister could no longer be ignored, even more so than the confrontation between the former and the prime minister. Gilbert had always been popular. Sauter, the military advisor, gave him a discreet wink. Archdeacon Stylianides tapped the table without batting an eyelid, and even Kirkirk, the treasurer, coughed pretentiously. Zayn is a clever child, the Iron Hand King finally spoke slowly and calmly. He understands everything with a hint. Whenever he does something wrong, he knows how to make up for it. Quite a number of people looked at the petition in Gilbert's hands and seemed to be deep in thought. Make up for it. At that moment, Gilbert stared at the king with an indescribable feeling. Is that so? The cunning fox of Constellation sounded tired. 6 years ago, after Prince Thales' diplomat group was attacked by vampires in the birch tree forest, you and him solved and made up for it in this way, right? The vassals who did not know the story were instantly shocked. 6 years ago. Vampires. Even if you knew that Duke Covendier was related to the attackers? Gilbert's tone was almost interrogative. No one dared to speak. This time, the king of Constellation at the end of the long table was silent for a long time. The essence of politics, my friend, King Kessel said slowly. It is the binding of interests. Hearing this name, Duke Cullen frowned slightly. Gilbert's expression became increasingly bitter. Yes, I remember. These were Prince Midier's exact words. Hearing this name, everyone shuddered. So, Gilbert, my friend, if you want to repay kindness and enmity in a straightforward manner, the Iron Hand King snorted coldly. His tone took a sharp turn. You might as well read more about knights. In the face of the king's merciless words, Gilbert's expression dimmed. Very good, very right, your majesty. The Foreign Affairs Minister put down the letter in his hand and closed his eyes. But Gilbert's voice was as weak as a mosquito. Prince Thales, does he know? Many people's gazes shifted. King Kessel was silent for a moment. His gaze inadvertently glanced at the scar-faced spy from the Secret Intelligence Department. He knows now. Gilbert then lowered his head dejectedly and said no more. Dusk had arrived. The color of the sunlight gradually turned from golden to dark red. At that moment, the Supreme King bathed in the setting sun even appeared a little scarlet. Only his face remained dark and indistinct under the backlight. The Imperial Conference fell silent. Enough, everyone. Just as the participants were at a loss for what to do, another voice rang out. It was resolute and broke the silence. No matter how this letter came to be, since it is already here, we cannot let it go to waste. The military advisor, Sauter Ryder, glared at him. Whether it is voluntary or involuntary, whether it is compensation or a trade, since Duke Covendier kindly sacrificed his reputation and interests, even at the cost of being condemned by the masses, to submit a petition to His Majesty, to pay taxes in lieu of service, to share our political pressure, and to cheer for Renaissance Palace, he didn't. Sauter Ryder turned his head in shock. Gilbert still had his eyes closed and was massaging his forehead. Sorry. Gilbert took a deep breath. As far as I know, during the last years of the late King Aidie's reign, under the rule of the former Guardian Duke of South Coast, Leinster Covendier, Jade City's regular military service system had already been disrupted, loosened, and even ceased to exist in name. At the Imperial Conference, the ministers who did not understand South Coastal were taken aback. Prime Minister Cullen's eyebrows twitched. I see, the younger generation will surpass us in time. South Coast is ultimately not Western Desert, the kingdom's prime minister laughed involuntarily. The others remained puzzled, until Gilbert sighed. After the bloody year, due to the depression of the territory, and to repair the damage, the old Duke Leinster granted some of his vassals permission not to respond to the compulsory conscription. They did not contribute any able-bodied soldiers, but instead paid in lieu of service fees, so that he could hire professional mercenaries to deal with large-scale battles such as suppressing bandits. Gilbert explained patiently, slowly returning to his role as the king's advisor. To this day, the military service system under Jade City's jurisdiction is no longer complete and sound, exceptions have gradually become the norm, and it has been extended layer by layer. When the conscription order comes, every family can be exempted from service as long as they bribe enough. Instead, the conscription system has become a legal loophole for the recruitment officers to plunder the people and stuff their own pockets with the conscription books. The military advisor, Sauter Ryder, was deep in thought. Everyone's expressions slowly changed. King Kessel listened quietly to the Foreign Affairs Minister's explanation, his thoughts unknown. I remember now, during the National Conference 6 years ago, when everyone was discussing whether to send troops, Prime Minister Cullen shook his head, seemingly having gained some insight. It seems that Zayn wasn't completely lying at that time. Gilbert nodded, his mind preoccupied. In other words, this seemingly costly petition is but a favor at little cost. The Duke of South Coast described the established situation in Jade City as his own sacrifice and loyalty, brought the tacit convention to the surface, and turned it into a decree in black and white. He even claimed that this was a need for the king and the regular army. he didn't have to pay anything. Gilbert pushed the petition for servitude to the center of the conference table. Even if this order is approved by His Majesty, Covendier will not suffer any actual losses. Perhaps he can even purge the corrupt and inefficient governance, regulate the chaos of paying taxes for servitude, and let the people who have worked hard for a long time applaud and praise the Duke of Iris Flowers who serves the people wholeheartedly. On the other side, Moneybag Kirkirk snorted softly and added, he can also swallow all the dirty money that his subordinates plundered during the conscription, of course, in the name of His Majesty Kessel and the regular army of the royal family. The Chief of Finance rubbed his hands in envy. Covendier has been rich for many years, he really has a way. Gilbert's expression was cold. Also, as Lord Cullen said, the next time there's a war, South Coast Hill will be able to refute with reason at the National Conference that they have received the King's permission to pay taxes for servitude and not send troops. The fat Prime Minister nodded benevolently. Gilbert turned to the astonished advisor Sauter. As for what you said, Sauter, Iris Flowers' political support and solidarity for Renaissance Palace, Gilbert paused for a moment. Don't forget, Zayn only presented the petition to His Majesty after he was publicly accused of being the mastermind by Prince Thales at the banquet. Prime Minister Cullen continued Gilbert's words. He shook his head and appeared to be in a good mood. If the news gets out, as long as it's done properly, this will not be a symbol of Iris Flowers siding with the royal family, but merely a helpless move by Covendier under pressure from Renaissance Palace. Not only will Jade City not be blamed, but it will also receive the sympathy of his vassals and even the suzerains in the country. The king must have forced him to do this. The Prime Minister blinked thoughtfully. Is that so? No one answered him. Instead, it's Renaissance Palace. Gilbert's voice sounded again, becoming unhurried, gentle, and drawn out. This matter is sensitive to begin with. If we bear the infamy of forcing vassals, whether it's the reduction of conscripts or the expansion of the regular army, the pressure we face will only be greater. He did not continue, but the atmosphere in the Imperial Conference grew heavier. What a pity. Chief of Finance Kirkirk slapped his thigh in frustration. If only Prince Thales had not howled at Covendier after finding out the truth, but had instead suppressed his temper and quietly reported to His Majesty. So, Cullen looked at the end of the long table, intentionally or unintentionally. Young man, you can't be too hasty. Gilbert's analysis completely chased away the excitement that the Imperial Conference had because of this letter, leaving not a single trace of it behind. Everyone was already exhausted, and now they were even more disappointed. But, everyone. The military advisor took a deep breath, pulled himself together, and raised his hand to attract the attention of the Imperial Conference. Perhaps Iris Flowers has its own plans, but this will not affect our choice. Sauter tried his best to convince everyone. Most importantly, if this letter comes to fruition, we will have the surrogate labor tax that Covendier will pay, and expand the regular army, but he was interrupted. I'm not trying to pour cold water on you, soldier. The Chief of Finance's familiar sarcastic tone sounded again, causing Sauter to frown. But, relieving every suzerain of the obligation to recruit soldiers to assist in battle, replacing it with a special tax item, using the collected money to expand the regular army, and in turn, filling up the defense and maintaining law and order of the disbanded conscripts. Sounds like a good idea. Steward Kirkirk cocked his cheek with a smile that did not reach his eyes. However, I have to deal with those profiteering suzerains of Jade City every season. Believe me, they can't do anything else, but every time they collect taxes. Sauter scoffed angrily. They dare to evade taxes. Worse. Kirkirk narrowed his eyes. They know how to keep accounts. Sauter was taken aback. What? Many people frowned. Prime Minister Cullen glanced at Gilbert and revealed an expression that said, I knew it. Kirkirk shook his head disdainfully. I say, their accountants are no less skilled than the Camions. The tax accounts are crystal clear, without a single concealment. But whether it's the calculation of tax rates, the choice of tax items, or the flow of tax, it's all extremely complicated. Can you believe it? Jade City is obviously rich, their land and sea trade has been growing year after year, and their total cash flow is enough to buy several small dukedoms. But their books are still in the red. And our tax collectors can't find a single mistake in their books. Not only do they have nowhere to scrape money from, they might even have to give back their taxes. The chief of finance flipped open the petition, stared at it in disgust, then threw it down again. As for the surrogate labor tax mentioned here, tell me, Sauter, do you think they'll find their conscience and give you a large sum of money out of thin air? Saldus' eyes widened, as if in disbelief that such a thing could happen. Kirkirk turned to the king and his tone became much more respectful. If this is the budget you've been waiting for, your majesty, Sauter. With all due respect, it didn't succeed. As for the expansion of the regular army, let's wait until next quarter's revenue. The king said nothing. Sauter, on the other hand, clenched his fists tightly. The words of the chief of finance brought the entire imperial conference back to reality and plunged it into a disappointed silence. So, Jade City's letter is just empty talk. I mean, if our proposal really passes, they won't have lost anything, and they'll appear reasonable and even make a fortune. The Minister of Agriculture, Lord Croppen, spoke shakily. But we, on the other hand, look like we've gotten the short end of the stick, but end up being the bad guys and losing our underwear. Cunning Southerners, Viscount Kenny threw the petition on the table and cursed unhappily. Say, do you think Iris Flowers is going to react to every move that comes their way, or have they been preparing for this for a long time, and have been waiting for this moment? The ministers looked at each other. They had no answer. Until the king spoke. Of course, this is not the best solution. King Kessel's tone was calm as he steered the conversation back in the direction he wanted, but this is already the greatest concession Jade City can make. The Iron Hand King looked at the letter gloomily. That sword from the banquet isn't enough. Gilbert could only sigh inwardly. Damn it, that young master from the western desert at the banquet, why did he only kidnap the guests? The military advisor slammed the table. If only he had committed a bigger crime, such as assassinating a prince, Gilbert reacted and rebuked angrily. Sauter. But Sauter just waved his hand nonchalantly. It's all right, you know that's not what I meant. Sauter turned around and looked at the letter on the table. He sighed and said, Gilbert, think again. Is there really no other way? This letter has finally solved our political and budgetary problems at the same time. Without waiting for the Foreign Affairs Minister to speak, Kirkirk stabbed him coldly from the side. Didn't you listen in class, soldier? It can't solve anything. Gilbert nodded tiredly. If His Majesty approves the proposal of this petition and starts reforming the military system from Jade City, taking this first step that is fraught with controversy, he glanced in the king's direction with mixed emotions. Then, Renaissance Palace will have to swallow all the bitter consequences I've mentioned. Aside from the Duke of South Coast's hypocritical support and the taxes that we don't know where they'll come from, the benefits are really limited. It's not even up to us to approve of it. Duke Cullen seemed to be in a good mood. This is different from a small matter like reorganizing the Jade Star private army. As long as this petition is made public in the form of an official document or warrant, the reform of the military system will definitely cause a huge uproar in the kingdom. We will be at the heart of the storm, and we will not be able to retreat. In the dark corner of the long table, the king's pupils gradually shrank. After all, asking for a sky-high price is just a tactic, Cullen said as he looked at the dejected Sauter. Just return the money on the ground. You can't really hope to sell it for a sky-high price. These words made the military advisor even more depressed. Majordomo Kirkirk yawned discreetly, looked around, and said tentatively in a tone that concluded the meeting. "Then this letter, just ignore it." Gilbert's tone was both resigned and resolute. "Bury it among the countless official documents and letters in Renaissance Palace every day. Drown it out without causing a ripple." In the Imperial Conference, he was answered with an awkward silence. Until the king's voice sounded again. "So," King Kessel chuckled softly, but without the slightest hint of a smile, making everyone shudder, "we've been sitting here for a day, and my son was attacked by an assassin at a banquet and almost died in a duel." At that moment, the Iron Hand King's face was revealed under the setting sun. There was an inexplicable strangeness about it. "And all we got in exchange for this?" All the officials in the Imperial Conference lowered their heads. No one dared to answer the question. Only Cullen calmly took a sip of tea and cast his gaze at the end of the meeting table. "It's a pity, Your Majesty, but this letter cannot give you what you want." "That's right," the wheels roll forward. The Duke of Easternsea put down his teacup and adjusted his crooked belt, satisfied. But not by brute force. At the end of the long table, King Kessel was silent under the setting sun. Only his eyes flickered slightly in the darkness. Chapter 6:13. Everyone. In Ballard Room, King Kessel's voice came steadily, heavy, solemn, and resolute. Just like in the past, every time he made a decision for the Imperial Conference, it looked like the outcome was set. With this in mind, the ministers restrained their emotions and adjusted their posture. Some of them relaxed slightly, ready to welcome the end of another conference. But not this time. Under everyone's gaze, the Iron Hand King raised his head and swept his gaze across the ministers. "All of you have a point." As he spoke, the king's right hand suddenly reached out from the shadow of the throne and flipped it gently at the crowd. His palm faced up and hovered over the meeting table. Just like a cold, unsheathed blade. Even the warm autumn sun could not reduce its chill. Gilbert, Cullen, Kirkirk, Sauter. All the ministers were stunned and did not understand what was going on. But the Iron Hand King remained expressionless and raised his right palm. "You've thought it through." As they looked at each other, only the scar-faced spy from the Secret Intelligence Department's eyes flickered. He tactfully stepped forward and picked up the Jade City Substitute Servitude petition from the table. The scar-faced man walked past every stunned minister and respectfully and appropriately placed the letter into the king's palm. "This letter is a barb with malicious intentions." King Kessel's voice came out quietly. "It appears to be compromising, but in fact, it has seized on Renaissance Palace's weakness and is hiding a trump card." The king slowly lifted the letter up, revealing the iris print on it. "We can't even make it public, or we'll be caught in a passive and unjust situation." Every servant who was swept by his gaze subconsciously tensed up and sat up straight. "It's better to die for a friend than to perish for an enemy." Old Leinster had such a son. In the next second, the Iron Hand King's fingers suddenly tightened and crushed the letter. The few people who had their eyes fixed on the letter trembled and were startled. Only then did Kessel say calmly, living up to the family name. In the indescribable silence, the Minister of Trade, Viscount Kenny, coughed with difficulty and tried to forget the depression in his heart. "He'll pay the price." Kenny bowed respectfully to the king. "Just for this letter." King Kessel glanced at him without a word. The letter was still in his hand, crumpled. "Of course," Sauter ground his teeth hatefully, "and also for his disrespect and disloyalty to you and your highness," Prime Minister Cullen's trembling voice sounded. "But not this time." He seemed to have turned back into the doddering old man. He coughed and concluded the meeting. "At the very least, the reduction of the recruits and the expansion of the regular army will have to wait until next season, at this moment." But it got out. The king's words came out of nowhere, as if he was mumbling to himself. no one could react in time. Pass, what? Chio-ko looked confused. Mine, your majesty. Sauter probed. I'll talk. At that moment, the king of the Iron Hand raised his eyes, which were particularly oppressive in the narrow Ballard room. While we are talking, every sentence, every word, and every letter on this petition has been publicized, leaked, and spread by someone. Rumors are spreading everywhere. The conference room was silent for a moment. Gilbert was in disbelief. What? Viscount Kenny's surprised gaze kept darting back and forth. You mean, this letter has been leaked? Prime Minister Cullen sat up straight and looked extremely serious. When? Why? However, the king only shook his head calmly and answered the truth. The Secret Intelligence Department is still handling it, but if it's unsatisfactory, I think it won't be long before everyone in the kingdom knows that Renaissance Palace is going to start with Jade City, change the traditional rules, strip the suzerains of their military power, reduce the recruits, and expand the regular army. All the way to the whole of Constellation. Renaissance Palace, Jade City, tradition, suzerains. With every word the Iron Hand King said, the chill in his tone intensified. The Prime Minister was the first to understand. His eyes widened slightly. That means, as you said just now, Bob, the king spoke in his calmest tone, not mincing words from the other party's mind. From the top to the bottom of Constellation, a huge uproar is about to break out. From this moment onwards, we are standing at the heart of the struggle. There's no retreat. The ministers quickly understood the meaning of this matter. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. What's going on? Who did it? Has the culprit been caught? What do we do now? Investigate the mastermind behind this. Amidst everyone's varying opinions and the same panic, the king leaned back thoughtfully and melted into the darkness. How could such an important exchange of letters be leaked? Advisor Sauter turned angrily to the other side and said accusingly, "What did the Secret Intelligence Department say? What about the rumors? What's the situation now?" Beside the conference table, the scar-faced spy from the Secret Intelligence Department bowed steadily. "We're still tracking down the source, encircling and intercepting it in an attempt to reduce the impact of the rumors." His tone was calm, as if what they were about to face was not a monstrous wave that could shake the country. But the delivery of the letter, the defense along the way, and the confidentiality of the palace are all fine. At this point, the scar-faced man's voice had an interesting rise and fall. "There's only one thing we can't take into account. This letter was delivered directly into the palace by the Duke of Iris Flower's messenger." Everyone suddenly fell silent. "You mean, Zane?" Prime Minister Cullen frowned. When he delivered the letter, he made up his mind to leak the contents and spread the rumors. The scar-faced man neither denied nor confirmed it. "We're still investigating." With a target in mind, the anger of the Imperial Conference erupted like a tidal wave. "Covendier, how dare he? Damn it, he's more cunning than his father. Did he fly into a rage out of humiliation and overturn the chessboard?" Among the officials, Gilbert only observed quietly at first, but at the end, he sighed softly. Perhaps after the banquet, when His Majesty questions him for his crimes, the Foreign Affairs Minister put away his dazed expression and said tiredly, "Jade City saw our weakness from the terms of the negotiations." But Prime Minister Cullen scratched his chin and looked solemn. "Something's not right. Zayn is not a good person, but he's not a lunatic either. The fact that he wrote this letter is enough to prove his slyness and self-preservation." The Prime Minister pondered. "He's not stupid enough to force Renaissance Palace and himself into a dead end. That's even worse, it's done by someone else." Viscount Kenny looked suspicious. "Plotting against both of us at the same time. Someone is looking forward to chaos in the kingdom, just like back then." Amidst the chatter, the voice at the end of the long table rang out again. It doesn't matter anymore. Everyone fell silent and looked at the king. Whether he did it or not, it doesn't matter anymore. A cold glint flashed in the king's eyes. The kingdom never lacks enemies. What's important is, how should we deal with it? After King Kessel said this, he let the petition slip from his fingers and fall between the sunset and the shadows. The wrinkled iris insignia faced the ceiling alone. A few seconds later, like a pride of lions awakened by a crisis, the Imperial Conference was no longer languid and slow, and everyone became shrewd and capable. Let the Secret Intelligence Department work overtime. At the same time, we will send a letter to clarify and put an end to such rumors. We might be able to find some clues from the feudal nobles who have expressed their dissatisfaction recently. We have to be careful with the wording of the announcement. There may still be room for maneuver. We need to make contingency plans immediately for the reaction of the nobles, especially the feudal vassals. Send special envoys to appease the feudal lords of the grain-producing areas and explain to them. I'm afraid the preparations for the military reform will have to be delayed. We cannot leave any clues that could lead to misunderstandings. Amid the intense discussion, only Prime Minister Cullen and Gilbert remained silent. The former gazed at Covendier's letter quietly, while the latter quietly tidied up the documents beside him, both deep in thought. Meanwhile, Kessel V sat quietly in his seat, expressionless, indifferent, as if he was the only outsider. Bang. There was a muffled sound. It was military advisor Sauter striking the table with his palm, attracting the attention of the Imperial Conference. Everyone. Saldus' expression was solemn. His gaze was slightly hesitant, but it quickly became focused and determined. I think, at this point, things are unavoidable. Our next choice is actually simpler. Gilbert frowned and turned his head, as if he had expected something. Sauter said resolutely. Since there's no way back, why not go forward with all our might? At that moment, the military advisor was in high spirits. Your Majesty, give Covendier a formal reply. Grant his petition, and announce to the nation that starting from Jade City, the military reform is imperative. Everyone was stunned. Or rather, they were shocked by this suggestion. Sauter, have you thought about the consequences? Gilbert said with difficulty amid the silence, including what we just discussed, of course. Sauter turned around and interrupted him. But at this point, our plan to take things slowly has gone south. We have no chance to disguise ourselves, nor do we have room for compromise. Sauter paused. His voice turned fierce. We do it. Or never do it again. There's no such thing as next time. His gaze swept across the room. Many of his colleagues could not help but lower their heads to avoid his gaze. Some looked solemn, while others hesitated to speak. Only the king at the end of the long table remained silent, as if deep in thought. But Sauter could not care less. He waved his hand. Kirkirk, find the money. The chief of finance raised an eyebrow. What? Sauter stared at the chief of finance. If Jade City did it, then we don't have to count on their financial aid. But under these circumstances, the military reform must be put on the agenda. According to the previous plan, we should first reduce the Jade Star private army from the vassals directly under the royal family around Eternal Star City, and expand the regular army. Only then will we have the strength to deal with what comes next. Kirkirk paused for 3 seconds, then became exasperated. Alright, let's not talk about the fact that the situation might not be that bad, and let's not talk about the fact that His Majesty hasn't agreed to your rotten idea. Our budget is already very tight. Once this letter is leaked and causes trouble, the financial pressure will only increase. If there's no revenue, we might even have to use other sources to make up for it, such as the salaries of the officials, or even increase taxes. That would be even worse. Kirkirk was in a great deal of trouble. Moreover, reorganizing an army is not as simple as registering and creating a register. Even if you have prepared all the officers who are waiting to be incorporated, do you know how many Jade Star private soldiers who are called up at the right time cost to maintain a regular soldier, from the salary, equipment, logistics, and station? I know. Kirkuk was exasperated. That's slandering, nonsense. I have the names of those officers. Why, do you want to confront them? Or have the Secret Intelligence Department investigate? Your Majesty, Kirkuk was extremely anxious, but he was tongue-tied. Sauter gritted his teeth and pressed on. For this reason, you even secretly leaked the news of the regular army's expedition to the west. And that unlucky Doyle of Mirror River who got into trouble at the royal banquet. They're just one of the fat sheep on your list. At the Imperial Conference, the ministers were surprised and could not help but look at Kirkuk in a new light. Viscount Kenny coughed and asked worriedly, "Well, my father-in-law's family also has a few businesses in the Western Desert. You wouldn't. How could I, Lord Kenny?" Kirkuk smiled obsequiously. But he immediately turned to the king and put on a mournful face. "Your Majesty, I was just that." King Kessel just stared at him with narrowed eyes. "Kirkuk, you're indeed Moneybag." Gilbert saw Kirkuk's expression and guessed the truth. He could not help but sigh. No wonder they say that you can even take money out of your crotch. You're good at making money, and can support the kingdom. Kirkuk's cheek twitched. Yes. On the other side, Prime Minister Cullen snorted and added a sentence with an unclear meaning. Someone else's crotch. Sauter snorted angrily, his attitude self-evident. Under everyone's gaze, Kirkuk swallowed hard and hurriedly raised his hand. "All right, Your Majesty, listen to me, that's right. We originally had a few extra fines and forfeitures from this expedition, which can be included in the next quarter's budget." The Doyle family, Gilbert said in a low voice. Kirkuk froze. Sensing the suspicion in everyone's eyes, his voice immediately weakened. He took a deep breath. "That's right. But the Doyle family deserved it. Over the years, they've crossed the border to occupy land, illegally rented tenancies, smuggled taxes, concealed the population, and violated tradition. All these crimes should have been dealt with long ago. Our Department of Finance is dedicated to the kingdom and does things impartially. Cut the crap. Where's the money?" Sauter ignored his excuses and went straight to the point. "Now, it's been several months since the prince's return, and our mission is complete. Your Department of Finance should be full by now, right?" The military advisor was aggressive. "Why did you make all sorts of excuses during the Imperial Conference about being poor? When South Coastal forced us into a corner, you still held onto your wallet tightly and obstructed His Majesty's military reform." Kirkuk was both shocked and angry at the same time at this accusation. He looked around, but none of his colleagues dared to interrupt. Saldus' gaze was sharp and threatening. Kirkuk felt dizzy. Regardless of the consequences, His Highness has saved 2 lives and 2 families with his superb skills, preventing a worse situation. "But it is a barbaric method of a bloody duel," another voice said. "May the setting sun forgive him." Gilbert turned his head around in disbelief and stared at his best friend. "Guy." Archdeacon Stylianides nodded apologetically. "Before I entered the palace, the bishops were discussing this matter. The officials exchanged glances and understood each other's intentions. The archdeacon made a penitential salute. With the setting sun as witness, the Duke of Star Lake dueling in person and resorting to the ancient rites of barbarism and heresy, that's a terrible signal and demonstration. No, that happened at night, Prime Minister Cullen scoffed sarcastically. It should be, witness of the North Star. All the officials in front of the Emperor lowered their heads. Gilbert sucked in a deep breath and explained to his good friend. Guy, my friend, as far as I know, the duel was unreasonably proposed by the other party, and Prince Thales agreed to the duel out of pity. Putting himself in danger was just an expedient measure. Guy nodded in understanding. Of course, I understand the prince's difficulties, and I admire his benevolence, magnanimity, intelligence, and wisdom. But do you think that after this story spreads throughout the kingdom? Duke Cullen clicked his tongue and shook his head. When people mention a duel, will the first thing they think of is the prince's benevolence or Jadestar's violent duel? Gilbert furrowed his brows. The archdeacon smiled as well. What Lord Cullen said is not without reason. Just like how the bishops of the church are also worried. In Northland, the Extension warriors may have given His Highness the courage to fight to the end, but they also numbed His Highness' thoughts in the midst of violence and bloodshed, causing him to not reject the barbaric and backward ancient rites. Gilbert stared at his good friend deeply. He could not hide his disappointment. And the king still did not move. As time goes by, His Highness, as the heir to the kingdom, has not avoided heretical beliefs and rites time and time again. Guy's tone became worried. This will have a profound impact on people's attitudes and ways of doing things, causing young people to be hot-blooded, desperate people to take risks out of desperation, and imitators to advance wave after wave. This will be greatly detrimental to the kingdom's existing governance. Moreover, the goddess will not be happy to see her believers bleed because of barbaric duels, and the same goes for her believers. Count Kroppen looked at everyone's expression and interjected with great interest. That, I also think, enough. The Foreign Affairs Minister's rare outburst of anger silenced the gossiping crowd. Everyone. His Majesty did not summon us to this room for us to judge right from wrong and pursue the matter to its roots. As for the other unexpected consequences caused by Thales' actions, be it the chaos in the Western Desert, Doyle's case, the duel, the dispute, or this damned letter and the predicament it brought, they are, in fact, the result of our lack of consideration and planning. This is the dereliction of duty and incompetence of our servants, and it is the responsibility that we should bear. Gilbert exhaled, paused for a moment, and looked at everyone. Everyone turned their heads away to avoid eye contact with him. When Gilbert said this, he felt bitter. Shift the blame to His Highness. This will not cover up our incompetence, nor will it solve more problems. And that child should not be responsible for a mistake that he is unaware of. At this moment, Duke Cullen suddenly spoke. Even if he is a Jadestar. Gilbert's expression changed. He turned around abruptly and showed no signs of weakness. It is precisely because he is a Jadestar. Prime Minister Cullen frowned. After pausing for a few seconds, the Prime Minister sighed. I know, Count Casso, you are his teacher, but Gilbert quickly interrupted him. I am not saying this just because he is my student. Gilbert turned around and faced his other colleagues. His tone was resolute and brooked no room for doubt. It is also because of Prince Thales himself. Whether it is his courage and achievements in going north as a hostage, his experience in traveling thousands of miles back to the country, or his courage in saving people at the banquet, all of these prove that he is worthy of being the Jadestar descendant, the Duke of Star Lake, and the bloodline of the kingdom. When he said this, Gilbert's voice trembled slightly. We should all feel honored and proud to have such a prince. We should be the long swords in his hands, not the stones in his boots. We should help him, not obstruct him. When he finished speaking, Gilbert raised his hand and pressed it against his eyes. He took a few deep breaths. The Imperial Conference was silent. The king's gaze was still like a sharp blade in the snow, emitting a cold glare. Vice Bishop Guy sighed and patted Gilbert's arm, gesturing for him to sit down. Gilbert. Gilbert flung his friend's arm away and took a deep breath. Please forgive me, everyone. He tried hard to adjust his emotions and calm his tone. Just as your majesty said, I am tired and old. Ballard Room was silent. At least you are not fat. Prime Minister Cullen took over the conversation. He was a little dispirited and sentimental. I will not be an eyesore to certain people. This sentence had a profound meaning, and no one dared to continue. That was until the King of Constellation tapped her fingers lightly and broke the dull atmosphere. Gilbert. Kessel V's gaze was directed at him. He could not hide the complicated and subtle tone in his voice. Old friend. But Gilbert suddenly raised his head. And you, your majesty. The Foreign Affairs Minister's voice suddenly rose. How touching. For some reason, Thales, who had been filled with pressure when he entered and left Renaissance Palace a few times, actually felt relaxed and happy at that moment. It was as if he had removed all his burdens. But his smile did not last long. Because at that moment, Gilbert's expression was extremely complicated. He stared at Thales' face, then at the sword on his shoulder. He seemed to be smiling bitterly, grieving, sighing, and feeling grief. It made Thales stunned for a moment. I know, Your Highness. Gilbert sucked in a deep breath and lowered his head. When he looked up again, he was beaming with joy. You are not satisfied with your marriage. Gilbert's smile froze, and he suppressed his rapid breathing. I understand. When he said this, many people were confused. Thales was also stunned. Marriage? What marriage? But you don't have to be so anxious. Gilbert cut him off fiercely. While he talked to himself, he gave Thales an anxious look. I told you, just wait for me at the entrance of the palace. I will explain it to you. Gilbert laughed, turned his head, and smiled bitterly at the others. You know, young people are not satisfied with their marriage candidates. They are a little impulsive and wanted to clarify things with me, and our meeting went on for too long. He could not stay, so Thales blinked and gradually understood. He could not help but feel warmth in his heart. But it was a pity. Gilbert, I see. Deputy Bishop Guy reacted quickly. He smiled faintly and nodded. Marriage is indeed a big matter. May the goddess bless. Viscount Kenny was born noble. He also reacted and laughed heartily. Oh, yes, yes. Of course, we were young once, we understand. Prime Minister Cullen also blinked and shook his head like a kind and amiable old man. I still remember that His Majesty once made a fuss about marriage in front of the late king. The ministers in the Imperial Conference laughed continuously. They had excellent chemistry and soon got along well, making the atmosphere in Ballard Room much more comfortable. Most of the royal guards also understood what was going on. Unknowingly, they began to laugh and relax their tense muscles. But Adrian sadly noticed that in the face of such an atmosphere, only two people were unmoved. King Kessel did not laugh. He stared blankly at Thales, as if there was no one else in his eyes at that moment. Thales put on a fake smile. There was no warmth in his eyes when he looked back at the king, only an eager challenge. Fabio, very good. You are very responsible. It was just a false alarm. Advisor Sauter exhaled and gave Adrian a thumbs up. But the exercise was very effective. I suggest that we reward our brothers. Clang. A muffled sound of metal colliding suddenly rang out. The royal guards who had not completely relaxed shuddered and unsheathed their swords. Steady. Adrian bellowed, calming down a possible conflict. The royal guards who had just come to their senses breathed rapidly and looked at each other nervously. Only then did they put away their weapons under the strict orders of their commanding officer. The ministers in front of the imperial conference were tongue-tied in disbelief. Sorry, it's too heavy. The person responsible for the muffled sound, Thales, breathed heavily. He laughed and dragged the blade from the ground. No wonder it's called load-bearer. King Kessel narrowed his eyes. The emotions in his eyes became more and more indescribable. After this incident, the minister's efforts were completely interrupted. Gilbert's expression only became more bitter. This made Thales feel a little guilty. But soon, he put this behind him. He stepped forward nonchalantly and reached out his hand. Swoosh! A few of the royal guards unsheathed their weapons again. Don't worry. This time, Thales chuckled and walked to the discussion table. He gestured for everyone to relax. I just want to give myself. The prince sat down casually, patted the shoulder of the person next to him, and looked into the Iron Hand King's eyes. Find a chair. Near him, Chief of Finance Kirk looked at the prince's hand patting his shoulder and revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. Sensing the puzzled and uneasy gazes around him, Thales smiled. Yes. Be it in the Hall of Heroes or here. He had to find a chair for himself. He had to wield a heavy sword that was beyond his means. He bet his life. Thales stared at King Kessel. He suddenly realized that every time he looked into his father's eyes, he could feel the heaviness and pressure gone. Even though the king's gaze was still sharp, he still felt a slight sting when he looked into it. Sorry to disturb you, everyone. Thales slapped his thigh and leaned against the discussion table. He smiled and said, I'm afraid that today's imperial conference will end early. In Ballard Room, both the courtiers and the guards looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The king's gaze became more profound. Thales looked at the sky outside the window and could not help but smile. Perhaps, it's not too early. He suddenly had a feeling that on the small table in front of him, there were surging waves that were constantly moving, pulling back and forth lines that were drawn back and forth. At this moment, he stepped into this room, just like a ship parting the water, cutting the Gordian knot. Finally. What are you doing? King Kessel's voice rang in the silence. He enunciated his words slowly, very slowly. Son. Son. When he heard this title, Thales felt a little dazed. Me? Thales paused and showed a sincere smile. I'm here to save you. The prince's inexplicable answer made everyone frown. Oh. In front of everyone, the Iron Hand King let out a faint laugh. Save me. He leaned back and blended into the darkness where the sunlight could not reach. He became indifferent again. It was as if his anger and madness had reached its peak, and he had returned to extreme calmness. Yes, father. Thales' attitude was relaxed and cheerful, as if he was enjoying a conversation between father and son. I'm here to save you. The prince also leaned back and entered the warm embrace of the setting sun. Only his gaze suddenly turned cold. It was like a sharp blade being unsheathed. To be free from the burden of that crown. Thales curled his lips and looked at the Iron Hand King with a smile. The crown. When he said this, the faces of the ministers in front of the emperor immediately turned ashen. The royal guards were all stunned. Gilbert could not hide his panic. He lost his composure and shouted, "Your Highness." At that moment, the light in King Kessel's eyes changed back and forth. But in the end, it all came to one. It was directed at the Duke of Starlake's smile. Thales raised his eyebrows and his smile froze. "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot." While countless people lost their composure in fear, Thales reacted and pointed at King Kessel's forehead without a crown. He smiled apologetically. "It's not on your head." Chapter 6:16. Other than the indistinct sound of breathing, Ballard Room was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. But as the chief commander of the Royal Guards, Lord Adrian felt that this was one of the most torturous, and painful moments of his life. Flames flickered and the shadows of the blades swayed. The setting sun illuminated the wall, blood red. Separated by a table, the Supreme King and the Duke of Starlake faced each other in silence. Everyone else went silent like cicadas in the winter. Amidst their fear and nervousness, they waited for this strange and fragile silence. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, King Kessel's deep and forbearing voice slowly rang in the room. "Why? Why?" The king's words were calm and slow, but contained an unbearable weight. The young duke's low laughter responded to him. Thales rested his forehead on the hilt of the load-bearing sword, exhaled, and stopped laughing. "Shouldn't you have expected this to happen? After you summoned me to the palace to have an audience with you, and after you raided Mindy's hall," Thales raised his head, his eyes like lightning. "Your Majesty." The prince's reply was light and indifferent, but it made many people who had been tense for a long time inexplicably heave a sigh of relief. The king stared at his son, the blue ocean in his eyes regaining its incomprehensible depth. He did not think for long before he snorted and turned his head, as if the person in the seat opposite him was not worthy of his attention. "Adrian, Mariko." The chief guard captain and the second vanguard bowed and pressed their hands on their chests. "Your Majesty. Your Majesty." King Kessel picked up the letter on the table and began to read. "The Duke of Starlake is overtired and mentally unstable." The king's casual words instantly made everyone's expressions change. Even Thales frowned slightly. "Let the royal guards escort him back to Mindy's hall to recuperate. Keep a low profile. The imperial conference continues." Mariko gladly accepted the order, and before he could wave his hand, one or two of the more daring and disgruntled guards had already stepped forward. Gilbert's face turned pale with fright. "Your Majesty." "No." Even Prime Minister Cullen frowned. "Your Majesty, will you reconsider?" The people from Mindy's hall outside the door were just as anxious, but Waya and Ralph, who were the first to move, already had a few swords pressed against their necks. Glover was pinned to the ground by a few of his comrades from the Vanguard Division, and he could not even breathe. Doyle, who was yelling loudly, had his mouth and nose covered. He could only shout, "No." The battle-hardened Cohen used the Black Horse as a barrier and struggled back and forth, causing the royal guards to panic. But at some point, a scar-faced man from Ballard Room appeared behind him. He said something, but the ferocious man suddenly froze. Faced with the prince's response, Lord Adrian sighed helplessly and looked at the king again. At the end of the long table, the Iron-Hand King seemed to come back to his senses and slowly looked up from the letter. "This is the kingdom's imperial conference." He glanced sideways at his son and snorted without a care. "I don't have time to listen to an aggrieved brat cry his heart out." The vassals looked at each other. King Kessel's tone suddenly turned cold. "If he wants to commit suicide, let him be. Let him be." In the midst of his shock, Thales could not help but clench his teeth. Jadestar does not need idiots. The Iron Hand King lowered his head and returned his gaze to the letter. Or cowards. Everyone's gaze returned to the Duke of Star Lake. The vassals nervously paid attention to his gaze and words, while the guards stared at his movements and the tip of his sword. Thales felt a chill in his heart. At that moment, it was as if he had returned to Dragon Cloud City and the Hall of Heroes in Heroic Spirit Palace 6 years ago. At that time, the Born King and the 5 Archdukes' gazes were the same as now. Like thousands of sharp arrows, they shot towards the sword in his hand that was too heavy to hold. They were waiting. Waiting for him to commit suicide. Or surrender. It had been 6 years. Nothing had changed. Except for one thing. Thales' gaze became determined. The sin of Hell's river gathered like a trickle, helping him to grip the bearer on his shoulder. The sword in his hand was no longer unbearably heavy. Then you must be an idiot and a coward, father. Thales spoke calmly, but his words were as sharp as a knife. Or, you don't want to be a Jadestar again. Is that so? As soon as he finished speaking, the content insulting the king was met with a dead silence before it caused an uproar. The king did not move. Only his eyes emitted a cold light. It had been 18 years since Castle Jadestar was crowned king after the Bloody Year. During the era of the Iron Hand King's rule, the last time someone directly contradicted or even insulted the Supreme King was during the National Conference 6 years ago. The Duke who committed treason and spoke rudely was already in prison. He was destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Many people who hoped that the situation would calm down had their hopes dashed. They could not help but sigh in pain. The royal guards' gazes were solemn. They pressed on their weapons and nodded to each other as a final confirmation. Your Highness. Gilbert's face was ashen. He closed his eyes and did not speak anymore. But unexpectedly, the king moved slightly and put down the letter. Oh. King Kessel's questioning voice rose, stopping a few guards who were prepared to launch a sneak attack from behind. The king stared at the prince for a very, very long time. But this time, there was something else in Kessel's gaze. Why?